Oh my god, so hot. Super hot. Am I in heaven or what? Super hot.
Let's start with this tweet I received from Jan Janowski. He's a member of the German diplomatic corps. And when I told people that I was talking to you, I got lots of different questions. And this gentleman said that you were, and I quote, a true legend, somebody who uncovered Korea back when nobody was paying attention, a hero of his younger days, and you are someone from whom he learned so much. So can we start with the early days? That's a nice tweet.
That's the most flattering intro I've had.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Mr. Jan.
Yeah. Janowski. Jan Janowski.
Jan Janowski. Yeah, the early days, I guess I should just start by introducing myself.
Yeah, sure.
So I came to Korea for the first time after college in 1994 on the Fulbright English Teaching Assistantship, which is basically the extension of what the old Peace Corps used to do. But they ended the Peace Corps in the late 80s because Korea was too developed, for being a Peace Corps country.
Yeah.
So, but the Peace Corps generally did English teaching in public schools. And the districts liked that a lot. Native speakers in the schools, that was a premium kind of thing to have. So they negotiated, and the State Department said, we'll extend essentially what they did under a new program, Fulbright English Teaching Assistantship. So what I understand is in 1994, or actually 1992, they started one in Korea, one in Germany. And by 94, I think there was one in Taiwan as well.
Okay.
But I came to live with the host family and teach in the school where my host family kid lived. So I taught in a middle school. So all of us taught in middle schools and high schools all across the peninsula.
So you stayed with a family, actually.
Yeah.
You weren't by yourself.
So it was kind of it's a brilliant program because it puts you in the basic two institutions of society, the school and the family.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like the best of what you get on a foreign exchange, but you also get to be an authority figure and be a contributing member of society. And also, State Department doesn't have to pay your salary because by working in the school, you get your salary for working as a teacher.
What was salary like in 1994? For
800,000 won, which actually in 1994 money was about $1,000.
Okay.
And on Jeju, they increased ours to 900,000 because we had to take the plane to go to the peninsula. But yeah, I cut my teeth on that.
How old were you then?
I was 22. I didn't know shit about anything.
I still don't.
That was my first job, actually. I mean, I worked in like church's friend, small part-time. But my first out-of-college job was teaching in Korean school. So yeah, I quickly learned how to do that, and I was starting to read my students' textbooks. And I started, as a part of learning Korean, applying the stuff that I was learning grammar-wise. And I started realizing that one of their textbooks, Dodok, the morals curriculum, was just batshit crazy. And I was like, wait a minute, this is like reheated, like Prussian. You could even argue even Nazi-era views on race and ethnicity. And I was like, where is this coming from?
What kind of stuff did it say? Like, what was it?
Koreans are a pure culture, a single culture, race, and people. The one race, like Ein Reich, ein Deutschland, überall. I was like, that's what I'm hearing in my head.
It's like the Tanil Minjok,
Yeah,
the
Tanil
one
Minjok.
ethnicity type thing. Yeah.
So I'm like, I need to know where this is coming from. And then I realized after looking into it that it's coming from Japan, essentially. Japan's notion of how to think about race, ethnicity, blood, people, basically is the framework that influenced Korea intellectuals and, all over China, Taiwan, other places, obviously. So I thought that was interesting, and I started doing my dissertation in that direction and thinking about Korean national identity and how race is constructed and all that stuff. So then I took that to my dissertation, actually made that my dissertation, and came back in 2002 to go into the archives to get the difficult, original textbooks, textbooks that really aren't published anymore. All that stuff, I actually found all the stuff really easily, and we had a good connect with the Ministry of Education, KEDI, Korean Education Development. They had all the textbooks. They had this big room with all the textbooks, even textbooks that they kind of want to forget about, like what's the one? Paren Senghwa.
Okay.
Like how to be a proper person. Like that's basically what Doduk was. So I found all the stuff, but then I just was like, I was getting more into photography, street photography, and I was kind of like, this is boring to me. So the really figuring out what constitutes Korean identity seemed to be much more interesting but challenging by doing that visually. I felt like there's something out there that people haven't defined and captured, and I try to do it with, documentary film photography. So
you must have had the Korean language that you do now.
I do now.
Yeah. What was it like in 1994 or 2002 when you're going into the archives? Because if you're reading those books, you need to be able to read them.
Well, the problem is really 1994, I had taken a year of Korean at school, and it was a pretty crappy course.
Yeah.
By the end of that course, I could say, I go to school. I go home. I didn't even know the past tense that well.
Right.
That's my fault. It was not a great course because Korean language education was garbage for most of the time it existed until pretty much the late 90s, maybe early 2000s. And so I was pretty non-functional. So Fulbright orientation gave us a pretty good, intense 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Go into a hole, beat you with a stick kind of exposure. So I basically got most of my Korean. I did audit the course, the Korean language course 1, after they fired the previous guy who had been around when I took it for credit. So I audited that once I found out I was going to Korea under the program.
Yeah. And
I was like, wow, I can actually make sentences and not really talk, but wow, my previous professor was really bad. Fulbright also cleaned that up with their intensive course. And by the time I got down to Jeju, I could haltingly put together sentences, ask for things like, I want to go to the bathroom, that kind of thing. But I couldn't really talk. So, But after the end of 2 years, I really got it under my belt. Yeah. I was able to converse, and I became functionally fluent in that I could go back and forth and have a conversation that wasn't planned or structured. So that kind of became my base.
I've seen you do that in videos and things. It's impressive. It makes me, I have to hit the books harder. I have to keep studying. But I've seen you do that. It's talking the talk, which you need to do it. It's really impressive. Korea must have had a positive effect on you. Like you came back and you're still here. So, you find these things in the Todok books, the textbooks that you question and you explore. But you must have enjoyed it. Is that right?
I definitely enjoyed the process. I mean,
I enjoyed Korea. You must enjoy being here. There's something about it.
I think there's something about it that. So the best example I can give you is, I think as a foreigner who is trying to do something or figure something out about the place, you're kind of open to weird experiences that come in from left field. And me and a friend named Kim, who may end up watching this, she's a Korean adoptee who is from the Midwest, like me, Wisconsin. I don't know if that's the word Midwest, but so we're walking down the street in Busan, and these kind of maybe gangster kind of guys, or like kind of people we never associate with at home. Yeah, like organized crime, like American Italian mafia type gangsters, the guys who wear suits and say, yeah. So they're like, hey, do you want to come into our club? And we were like, do we? And
I'd probably say yes. And to be honest, I'd have a look.
They took us into the club because we were like, yes. What are we not doing anything else? We're just bumbling tourists who don't know anything about anything. And we're in there, and they were like, oh, here's your girl, and it's a room salon. Oh, so she starts feeding me fruit, and Kim is like, where's mine? Like, I want a guy. Yeah, I'll stay if you bring me a guy. And and there wasn't really a guy. I think what they did is they called up a friend to step up to the task. And we're there, and they didn't obviously charge us the full amount. We didn't know what was going on. So we were just eating fruit. I don't think they charged us anything, if I remember. Had beer, got fed by some random person. Hope her hands were clean. Anyway, it was an experience, but that's a sort of random thing you could wake up not expecting to happen to you in a given day. Yeah. And you have access, in that sense, to things that other Koreans also wouldn't have access to. Because a normal Korean person walking down the street fits into a certain social role. They look a certain way. Yeah. They're not going to be like, hey, do you want to come hang out with gangsters? Average, kid, high school kid, mom, university student is not going to be seen in that way. So we had a certain kind of access. So I don't know if I'm answering your question or if I'm veering way off.
Yeah, it's all good. I mean, I can see you've painted the picture, Mike. I get it. I guess what was, can you just, before we move on to the other stuff, what was Jeju like? You were in Jeju in the 90s? Mid-90s? I have no idea what Jeju was like in the 90s. I can't picture it.
The problem is, I was in Jeju, arguably during the last days when Jeju was Jeju. When Jeju was Jeju.
Okay, you got the pronunciation. Yeah. Okay.
When I came into Korea, it was Visit Korea year, and Jeju-do was a central feature. It was trying to market itself as Korea's Hawaii. And then I was like, so anyone who goes there, you can market yourself with the pictures, and there are palm trees that are kind of dead in the winter, but they kind of come back to life. You can kind of market it as Hawaii to people who don't live there or have never been there. But if you're there, you're like, yeah, it's not Hawaii. It's not a tropical place. It's cool in other places, but back then Jeju was pretty culturally different from the peninsula. And there was enough. One thing that I remember is there was quite a bit of anti-peninsular sentiment back then. It was still, if you were a Jeju young lady and you decided to marry a Seoul man, that would still be a huge issue for conservative families. That's like interracial marriage or something. The Yukjinomder were just, that was a thing back then.
What I understood about Jeju, I'll try and get it right now, is that Koreans couldn't really travel abroad until 1989, freely. That was when that happened, January 1st. And so in order to get that honeymoon experience, going on a plane, going abroad, they couldn't really go abroad. So they went to Jeju because it felt like going abroad. So that's why they all went there. And I always heard stories about penis statues and sex museums and things like that.
Oh, that's all new. I never even heard of that stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's not Jeju in the 90s.
Okay.
Because the Jeju had turned itself into a business of basically exoticizing itself to other Koreans. But the penis stuff, that wasn't there. I don't know the history of that, but none of that stuff was a thing.
Until people got cameras, I guess. Also about photos. Well, here's something, because you're pretty, I don't know if this is the right way, but you're sensitive, you're tuned into style and culture and aesthetic and fashion, the way things look and vibe. What was it like back then in Jeju? Because again, this is just like books because I wasn't there, but you get rises of like orangey dog and like nouveau riche and things like that. What was the fashion or the culture or the vibe like in the 90s?
I guess the 90s was the whole vibe in the country. I think that what made it interesting back then, what made Korea the kind of secret that basically only like Korean Americans, Korean diaspora people, and a few random army people, and what are the Sungyosa?
I don't know what that is.
I need to remember my English. The Utah people.
Okay, like Mormons or something
Mormons,
like that.
The not exchange, but the people who spread God.
Missionaries,
yes.
evangelicals. Yeah. They're normally in pairs with short sleeve shirts.
Yeah,
and
so
books. Yeah,
those guys actually were the worst. I mean, they got it the worst. I mean, I actually hung out with some. I can't really hang out with Mormons, but I mean, I felt their position in society because I was often mistaken for a Mormon. Because I would walk around going to school with like short sleeve dress shirt and a tie. I didn't have the black badge. But also there weren't, that I could see, any non-white Mormons at the time. So, yeah, I was like, I kind of don't see why you're mistaking me for that. But,
yeah.
But at the time, yeah, the whole mood of the peninsula and the island was like somebody who just won the lottery. Mm-hmm. Like that's, I think, how Korean partying or Koreans' attitude towards money, consumption, all that thing. Because, I mean, until the late 80s and the turn of 90s, I mean, the big party that happened, I think, was the Olympics, 88 Olympics.
Yeah, man.
That kind of started the change in the, I think, notions of self in terms of the world, globality, that kind of thing. I think 88 Olympics made Korea's globality, sense of globalness, real. As Korea started getting real money into the 90s, the Orange Joke you just mentioned, they were a legendary group of people because of the kind of money they wielded, the kind of partying they did, which was legendary, the whole Yata stories.
Yata, yeah.
So, I mean, it was a time when people were just like, all this new culture was there and people were ready to bask in it. The Yata culture that is still a legendary story, but this is real. Like, this was a time when you could have a sports car from overseas. If you had that kind of money at the time, you, faking or not, you were in that sports car, you had money. And you could be like, go pull up in Apgujeong Rodeo to, why would you drive a sports car in Apgujeong Rodeo? Because you're just driving in a circle like a golf cart.
Yeah.
You can't do anything with it. No. It's only to be seen, and you see some pretty girl walk by, and you're like, yeah, hey, get in my car. And then you'd go to a motel and you'd fuck. So, can I say that?
Yeah, you can say that.
But I mean,
I'm thinking Billy Ocean or something like that. I'm thinking of his own songs. Yeah, go to motel.
Yeah, I mean, but that's how, like, it was a new thing, and it was the thing that the hyper elite kids could do.
Was the promiscuity new? Was the idea of sex new? That might be like a gross misunderstanding, but was that idea of
the thing that drives a lot of my photography and my ethnography is I like to keep it real. I like to show the real because people used to lie to me all the time and be like, "Oh, there are no gay people in Korea. We have to come back to that."
Yeah.
There are people who don't have sex before marriage, and I believed all that crap. Kind of believed it, but what I realized is the promiscuity, I realized this too late, is it's been around for a while. It's just that nobody talked about it. Like, you could be promiscuous as you want to be, but as long as you don't get caught. I mean, I think the difference between the Orange was just, they were just like, you know what? We're rich, young, and whatever. We got this money.
Yeah.
And we don't have to apologize for anything anymore. So I think that's kind of the mood of the time. And it was definitely super different than it is now, where it's a much more self-assured kind of, there's a deeper confidence, and it's not a new thing. It's not you just got the prize. It's older money now.
Yeah.
It's a more comfortable wealth.
Yeah, and it's less hidden. It doesn't conform to norms or things like that. It has fuck you money almost. You know, they can do what they want. What I find interesting is that if I want to know something about like Korean culture that you can't see but you can see, but like we used the word earlier, like vibes, but aesthetics and things like that. You seem to have your finger on the pulse. Like you do stuff like that. You do it in English and you have it all out there. How did you get into that? So you're doing dissertation, you're doing like Tanil Minjok, you're doing ethnicity and things like this, but you move into this kind of, you talk about brand Korea. You're talking about things that we can't really see almost. Do you know what I mean? How'd you get into that part of it? When does that start, and what do you see there?
I mean, I have to say the simple answer is fashion. Although that's when people hear fashion, they think about like the fashion industry. They think a certain type of person. Even I, as a photographer, I'm supposed to look a certain way that I don't look when I'm supposed to be doing fashion.
You meant to have a beret or something.
Yeah.
Like that, yeah.
And a fitted, nice suit or something, and be kind of So I was doing street photography, and my whole thing about street is I started realizing the more I was looking at it, I was trying to capture what I think is the most interesting part of Korean visual culture, which is public culture, this hyper-constructed notion of femininity. And so what I was trying to do is capture pictures of gender performance to get into like Judith Butler and all those people. But I felt like, so when I was in grad school, in between, my first time in Korea and preparing to come back, I remember talking to a friend of mine, Steven, in grad school, saying there's something that I can't quite define or write about. There's no way to research it. There's no references on it. And I called it fetishized femininity. And I felt like there's a thing going on there. I don't know how to talk about it, but it's there. So when I came back, I just kind of had that in the back shelf. But when I was doing the photography, which I found more interesting than just going into the archives, I found that in my photography, I was capturing those moments more and more. Now, that can become a problem if you're taking pictures of mostly women that, without their permission, on the streets. So, and it becomes expensive to do street photography to begin with.
What's expensive about it?
Back then, it was all film. So,
okay. Yeah.
So you run a 36 roll of T-Max, 400. I got these large rolls that were like, the no box. They just buy them in the big rolls, and then they cut them for you.
Okay.
So I got them pretty cheap, like $3 a roll or so. But you go through, 6 or 7 rolls, because the way you shoot is really to capture a moment, you burst shoot, so you can go through a roll pretty fast. So the time I was really getting deep into it, I was working at Day One Foreign Language High School and making a lot of easy money. So I'd go through, I just burn through 10 rolls in a day, but actually around that time, 2006, I got my first DSLR.
Okay.
And that happened through fashion. So there was a friend of mine who knew I was doing photography, and she wanted to do what was popular then, which was make an online shopping mall, right? Because what was her name? The $100,000 girl. She had just become famous for making irok by doing an online shopping mall.
I've not heard that story.
That was like the thing that drove a lot of the on-the-street fashion interest back in that, like 2005, 6, 7, I don't remember.
It was like the dream that could be achieved.
Yeah.
It was an example or something.
And it was like, just and she's not a special person, just anybody.
Yeah.
She opened an online shopping mall and started, bringing in clothes from wherever, China, I don't know, wherever it was, and started selling, things from overseas, some items that were difficult to get here, especially. So there'd be people taking the plane to, like the States, stuffing their bags full of stuff, bringing it back here and selling it, going back and forth, and being able to make that profitable.
One of my students just said today that her mum does like retail sales like that. She said her mum gets the clothes from China, then takes out the label and puts a Korean label in there. Her friends were like, "So you mean my clothes might actually?" And they were,
yeah. That's the story.
Grassing up her mum like that.
That's the story. So she was like, "I'm going to do an online shopping mall," which was the thing that many young enterprising women did at the time. And she's like, I don't know. I don't have a photographer friend. Your only friend. Can you like take pictures for me? I'm like, no, I can't, because to do the kind of like heavy, modeling, posing, fashion catalog kind of stuff you're doing, it would be so prohibitively expensive with film because I don't have a DSLR. I mean, I knew people who had them, but I was like, yeah, it's not quite there yet.
DSLR is a digital one?
Yeah, digital. Okay. The ones that used to be the professional digital camera.
Okay.
So, yeah, I was like, I'm not really set up to do it. I would need a DSLR to do that, and I'm not sure if I can, get one. So I was not too sure about the prices because the DSLR for several years before, those were like $10,000, $8,000, $5,000. They were coming down, and just about when I was starting to think about it with her, the Canon released I think it was the 350D. That was the first under $1,000 DSLR. So I could take all my many lenses, just stick them onto that, and it was all good. So I was like, if you go in for the DSLR, I've got all the lenses, I got all the skills, I'll do your catalog for you. And she's like, cool. So she bought it. That was her investment. I felt like that's fair. So she had a couple models, and she just put the clothes on them, and I did it street fashion style. We didn't rent a studio or anything. And it was cool. I don't know if her business really took off, but once I went DSLR, once I went digital, I was like, I realized I can take street pictures, take any kind of pictures I want, and it doesn't cost me extra money. So at that point, I was just like, I eventually did a street fashion blog, or what I now call a street fashion blog. So taking pictures of the people on the street, what they were wearing, and that became street fashion. So it was kind of documenting what people were wearing.
Were you asking these people, or you were just snapping
it was just
the street?
Easier just to. So it was more like sampling from real people. So I'd drive by, shoot, walk past people, and just get so what I start doing is I'd have them like runway style, like the leg up, they're walking, and I would just cut them off at the mouth, just so you get a sense of their face. But because you're still chosankwon, there's still the right to control your facial image in Korean law. Okay. Which gets complex because actually it's never been a principle of criminal law. It's always been civil law. So what people think of chosankwon, they say chosankwon chime, like violation of my right to control my facial image. They think that's a criminal offense, but actually it's a civil offense.
But it's only the face.
Yeah, if you can be identified and receive harm, it's actually kind of the photographic parallel of libel. Like if it harms your reputation.
So you would take the photos, and then later you would
I just cut them off and put them up on the blog. And then, strangely, more people than I thought were starting to come into this and just wanted to see what people in Korea were wearing. And they started realizing that people were wearing really interesting stuff. The stuff that people were wearing in 2006 was really wacky by a lot of Western standards. If you're talking about Dolce & Gabbana, the big brands, then what Koreans were wearing was whack.
What was it? Give me some, because I was here at that time, but what was it? What were they wearing?
Like you'd get people waiting out in Hongdae, this area, on a weekend, and girls would get dressed up in their like frilly white dresses, and they're very, very effeminate.
They're kind of like prom dresses, or sometimes
they're
you
kind of
would
like
see
mini
on
prom
Friday
dresses,
and Saturday nights.
but you could show the shoulders, but the shoulders would be covered with lace because you can't really show the shoulders full out. And like it was a really kind of, basically it's kind of like a pimped out princess dress.
Okay.
But like that was a super Korean look, or like wearing that dress with like stockings and sandals, which is like, whoa. Like, yeah, anyway, that was a super Korean look. Very frilly, very girly, but also very formal. And putting those pictures up of couples out, in mid, talking to each other, hugging, actually even kissing on the street, was, kind of an exciting kind of photography to do. So sort of like documentary meets ethnographic view of fashion, because it was like what people do in their clothes. I felt like that was the most honest form of trying to get what I was get something about what Korea was about at that time.
Did you get any pushback? Did people look at you funny, like walking around with it? Were there other Korean people doing it? Did people sort of stop and go, "Hey, this is pretty cool. Take some more photos of me"? Like, what was the reaction from people to you doing it, or were they just oblivious?
Oh, no one knew.
No one knew. Okay.
I mean, that was my skill.
Yeah.
I mean, what you do when you're even with running with a big camera, because I was doing that since the beginning with street photography, like the Cartier-Bresson, the kind of, just in the street, French cafes,
Okay.
people doing things. I
Yeah.
mean, we're used to that kind of photography. They pioneered it, but nobody was asked, and that was part of the trick. Right? That's what made the thing interesting. So technically, what I was doing, while not perhaps ethical, wasn't illegal because I was caught regularly, about once a month or so. I mean, rarely, I was pretty good at it. I didn't ever hide my camera. That's the whole thing I don't like. I never liked about the word molka, which pretty much the first time I heard the word was in about 2006 in reference to people. Like the first time molka came up, people forget this, is there was a group of frankly pervy guys standing outside Apgujeong, one of the stations where the steps are metal. You can come down.
Okay.
And you can stand literally under the stairs and shoot up their dress. So there were like meets of guys with very expensive equipment. Some guys had like super 300 millimeter lenses, wide angle lenses to get the panties under the thing.
Oh, man.
And they would just stand there. And the interesting thing about the law then is like they didn't even try to hide it. And so women would come down and be like, "What the hell? What are you doing?" And they're just like, "Yeah, screw you, whatever. Fuck off, lady." And they'd go to the police station and be like, "Those guys are shooting panties under the thing, whatever." And the police would be like, "There's nothing we can do. There's not a single law in the books."
Jesus.
Yeah, so people would be like, "Oh, but it was without my permission." Doesn't matter. You can sue them in civil court if you receive damages.
Yeah.
But there's literally nothing we could do. It was on the news, molle camera, and that came up in reference to that initial practice, from what I remember.
That make your job hard? What you were trying to do harder? Did they like?
Not really, actually, because those guys were just straight up assholes. So, I mean, nobody ever saw me. I mean, I didn't hide my camera. I would have my big DSLR. I don't know, like maybe this. I would hold it. This is not a good example. Hold it like this, just not put it to your eye.
Okay.
And I would just pre-focus and just walk by and do a burst. If someone was dressed interestingly and just walking by, and then you'd get something usually if you practice enough. But yeah, the thing is, if you don't put the camera to your eye, in those days, people assume you're not shooting, right? So I would do experiments where, I mean, I'm a foreigner, so it kind of gave me an advantage where I'd put the camera to my eye and look at like something like a building and take a picture of it very loudly and be like, and then people are like, "Oh, that foreigner is behaving socially normally from what I expect. He's a foreigner. He's looking at stuff. He's taking a picture." Then I put the camera back down here, and I'm still running it. I'm actually taking the real pictures here of the person who may be just standing right in front of me, but I'll just kind of announce myself and make this motion to take a picture, and I basically, my goal was to record their clothing.
Yeah.
So I didn't do upskirts and all that stuff. I don't want to see panties and everything like that. So you get into trouble doing that. So my blog became known for recording people's clothing. And
Who was looking? I want to ask you I just want to make this one point very quickly, is that today in Korea, even you buy a new phone like this S23 thing I've got, you take a picture and it makes a clicking sound.
Yeah.
It by law, or it's built in, if you want to. So when you take photos here today, because of all that molka shit, the people taking photos of panties illegally, the men under the steps, that any photo you take now is just, it makes that sound. And I go back to the UK and a message will come up on my phone. Your camera sound has now been disabled because you're outside of Korea.
Oh, yeah.
Like it knows, and you come back in and you do it and it makes the noise again.
That's the law, that you have to adjust all these cameras. The funny thing about analog versus what people think happened. It's sort of like film grain.
Yeah.
Nowadays, the kids like to push the grain slider all the way up because they think that makes it look like what pictures used to look like, even though film wasn't actually that grainy, back then. But similar with, the camera phone, like actual cameras, the DSLRs are trying to simulate. They don't actually sound like that at all. I mean, I have an old Canon T90, which is a tank that makes a big, and it winds the film, and you know that you took a picture. But if you're good, I actually did a lot of my street photography, not the fashion stuff, with the T90. It goes, and it winds the film. And if you do the motor drive, it goes, it's ludicrously loud.
People know you're doing it, yeah.
But the thing is, I would do lots of shots on the subway. So what you do is from, decades ago, every time the subway doors close, it goes, boom, they crash close.
Yeah.
And then it goes, right? With that kind of cacophony, you time it with the door closing, no one, it's completely masked.
It's like coughing when you fart or something like that, just to make sure nobody knows.
And if you get used to doing photography like street photography in a skilled way, the biggest winding camera sounds don't matter. But
who's looking? So when you start doing this in sort of 2006, 2007, that era, and you start uploading it as a blog, and who's looking at it? Is it Korean people? Is it foreign people?
Non-Korean people.
Okay.
Because the idea of a blog was a foreign. No one had a blog here. I mean, Psy worlds were a thing, but what I started doing is I started becoming less comfortable with this drive-by stuff, and I just wanted to do proper portraiture.
Yeah.
Like ethnographic portraiture. I was like, I'm going to change up my style. So I started asking people, and realizing that people will do it if you ask them properly and you explain it. And I'd be like, oh, I want to take a picture of you, and they're like, why? I'm not even famous. It doesn't make social sense to them. I'm not famous. I'm not super pretty. Why do you want to take a picture of me? Because I want to take because you're wearing nice clothing. I want to put it on the internet, which doesn't necessarily sound like a good thing to a lot of people back then. But I was like, oh, I'm trying to make my blog. That word existed, and they're like, what are you talking about? And I would say it's kind of like a mini homepie. On SciWorld. And they were like, why would you do that? I'm like, it's kind of like a magazine online, and it's like it goes out in the West, and Korean fashion is like really cool. I want to put you out there. So I started doing that. It was very difficult in 2006, 2007, but yeah.
You were ahead of your time, because now the like vlogs or Hongdae street fashion, like YouTube things and these things are so popular, man.
Oh,
I think people are aware of it now, but you were doing it before it was a thing, I think.
Yeah.
Can you explain ethnography to me?
Ethnography. So ethnography, basically, like if you think of anthropology, the anthropologist with the funny hat and khaki shorts and the notepad,
Livingston or something like that.
Living with the natives, as it were, and being a fly on the wall. That's recording what people do, how people live. Ethnography. So the recording the ways of people's lives. So basically, ethnography is a very hip approach now in social sciences. Finally, we've gone away from the pure numbers as the only valid data.
Yeah.
And now it's gone the other way, where you supplement a lot of that data with actually asking people what they're doing. So basically, I use the pictures to record, social reality. And there's no better way to do that than with pictures in many ways.
Pictures often of women.
Yes.
And so you mentioned hyper-constructed femininity and things like this. And I said to you before that, or I might have said it in here, that when I see photos, even if I don't know it's yours, I'll say, like, that's one of Mike's photos. You have a signature style. Before we get there, what was it about women? Why did you go that way? Where was that focus on? Is that just normal? That's what people take photos of in fashion.
Well, I
pretty
like
women.
I like to quote Korean. I guess she's a feminist scholar, more of a visual scholar, right? Because I'm quoting her now. I'm blanking on her name. Anyway, I can add it later.
Yeah.
Put a on the video.
Yeah.
She said something very, very cool. Women as objects of the fashion gaze, women as objects of the visual gaze, are the subject and object of the the visual of this gaze. So basically, women are subject and object of the fashion gaze. So my thing is, which is why Vogue is about women, women's fashion, and women's fashion, I mean, sets the terms of the fashion conversation. Men's fashion is important, but the point is when you at Seoul Fashion Week, when the first 2 days are men's shows, people are like, yeah, okay, cool, men's shows. But when the women's show starts, that's when the real shit starts. That's what everybody's waiting for. That's what they pay more for the packages for, right? So Vogue is kind of like the embodiment of that. So my thing is, I would say women are not only the subject, object, and verb. That's my little addition, the verb of the fashion gaze. Like women's bodies are literally the thing that does things to other things in terms of how we think about aesthetics and what we put on our body. So, I mean, men are there, but men are not the main thing. Men are not what drove K-pop in the beginning. It was women's bodies that drove that, right? So, I mean, you could reduce that down to simply sex sells, but I think you can go back down to Laura Mulvey and how the male gaze works, the person who made that term. And, yeah, I'll just start there.
Yeah. So sex sells, and we have the gaze, and we have the verb, that Judith Butler performative aspect of it. You have sex in your photos. I don't mean to say it like that, but your photos seem sexy. That's the better way I would phrase it. Sorry, I got that wrong. But I've often looked at Korean stuff, Korean K-pop you mentioned, Korean dramas. Everyone's beautiful, but no one's horny. There's not much in the way of sex appeal there.
Until recently.
It's changing a little bit, but incredibly beautiful, but never kind of, you don't see much in the way of desire or lust or that kind of thing. And it always seemed a little bit PG-13 or a bit kind of Disney. Your photos, they seem to have, the women seem to have agency. They seem to be people that I've seen in streets or clubs or things like this, right? That's a very interesting thing about your photography, I think.
Well, I mean, the thing that you can see easily about the photography, like it or not, because there are a lot of people who don't like it.
What don't they like about it?
It's too, everything you just said, it's too sexy, it's too direct, it's too filled with a male gaze. And I'm like, yep, and yep. So I think the thing about a lot of, when I see a lot of Korean fashion photography and Korean versions of Vogue and all that, like there's this acknowledgement of the gaze and the sexuality and of the fact that the woman as object is being gazed upon and you are placed in the position as gazer, which is coded as male, right? That's what Mulvey said a long time ago. But Korean photography always acts like that's not really there. It's this sort of like coy, it's there, but we're going to all act like it's not really there. I think what I do with my photography is I just put that front and center and be like, this is what it's all about. And I think also when you think about something, I'm blanking on the name, there's an obscure concept called frontality.
Okay.
So often when you look at photographic power, there's a certain power in being able to gaze at someone and they don't look back, right? So basically,
it's like voyeurism or something. Yeah.
So there, I think what happens in a lot of fashion photography or any photography that's of pretty people is you'll see someone like in a Vogue, a typical Vogue Korea layout. I will never be able to photograph for Vogue after this. You'll see wearing some item and their concept is fairy in the forest, and they're like looking off into like some light up here, and it's very pretty, but they're an object that you can examine with impunity, right? And the thing that people,
because they're not looking at you, they're gazing off, right? I get that. Okay.
So what I think is different is all my pictures to the point where it becomes almost like, that's why people say, I know what your pictures look like. All of them, they look directly at you. They implicate you. They make you pay for your looking.
So you can't steal the look.
You can't steal a look.
You can't, they're good.
Yeah.
I never noticed that about it, actually.
That's why people don't like it or like it. That's the one thing.
Wow. That never clicked on me before, that's what was happening. Because, that I would think of other things, but never got to me. And that's kind of empowering, isn't it?
I think so.
It gives power to the woman or to the person that you're shooting in that, because she's participating. And it's very interesting, actually, that kind of defeats the idea, or it's resistance against the molko or things like that. It's like, I'm looking at you, looking at me. It's returning it.
Like, so, I mean, imagine the feeling, the jolt you'd get. The typical example is Norman Bates in Psycho, right? Hitchcock, very guilty of the male gaze and the way he set that up. Yeah. It puts you in the position of, Norman Bates is looking through the hole where he's examining the person he's obviously going to kill. She doesn't know she's being looked at, right? And you as the observer get to bask in that power, right? But imagine she's getting undressed and whatever, and she looks directly into the hole and catches you. Your heart's going to jump. You're going to be like, oh, my God, I got caught. That's, I think, the difference. So that's why even with models I shoot, if they're like doing something, some kind of pose, and they experienced models will be like, they know they're looking right into the camera. They'll hear the camera and they'll also look off. They'll alternate. They know what the deal is. Yeah. But I'll generally choose the ones where they're looking at the camera. And with models that I shoot continuously, they realize those are going to end up being the A cuts. Okay. The B cuts for other Instagram, purposes, maybe the second picture in the carousel of the Instagram. But the first one will be looking directly into it. And that's what all my street fashion subjects were doing. And that's where a lot of the earlier street fashion stuff was somewhat doing, but somewhat not doing. So like if you look at Scott Schumann, the sartorialist who made street fashion photography and as a practice very famous.
When was that?
That was like 2010, 11, something like that.
That's recent.
Yeah, so a little bit later. I mean, 8, 9, I don't know, something like that. But like not the early 2000s. But he would use an 85 millimeter lens at 1.8 and have tight depth of field. That's his camera, the 5D Mark II, and that's why street fashion photographers in the late 2000s in Korea, everybody bought a 5D Mark II, in addition to that camera being useful for having manual audio controls for video. But also it was Scott Schumann's camera. 85 millimeter 1.8 lens was the big lens. And that's the difference with that kind of photography is 85 millimeters. You take the very nice portraits with the tight depth of field, what Koreans call out-focusing.
Okay.
That's
like where the person pops and the background is blurry?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have to be way back. Way back. I mean, like all the way across the end of a very large room, kind of back, to get them full body. Okay. Right? And a lot of his are 3/4 shots because you can't get full body. You have to be across the street, basically. But there's a certain way that, I mean, they can be looking directly into the lens, but they tend not to be when you're looking at across the street distance. Yeah. Right? You're gazing upon that person as a fashion object. They're not so much, they didn't establish a relationship with you as a gazer. So I shoot wide angle, and you'll see in a lot of my pictures, people used to kind of be like, what the hell is this guy doing? I'd get like a 18 millimeter, 14 millimeter lens and literally go down on the ground and shoot with the camera touching the ground straight up. And usually the woman, I started getting a radio slaved flash. So a radio remote. Yeah. And have an assistant or a stand hold the flash up here. Okay. Because what happens is even if somebody with a very short skirt, you can't get panties. It's the best way to prevent panties creeping in there. You shoot from a high angle, and it creates a shadow. Even if you can see the panties, it's not going to come out in the picture because it's going to create this huge shadow because the light's coming down. Models know that you're not getting panties. Everyday people might be like, yo, whoa, back up, dude. But, I mean, it's a very intimate kind of portrait because you get the full body in the frame.
Yep.
They look ridiculously tall. Their legs look long, and it also makes their heads super small, which is exactly what Korean women like. So
Small head and long legs and things. That's the thing. Yeah.
And yeah, if you want to make a person who's 158 centimeters look stupid tall and imposing, you shoot wide. You shoot Scott Schumann, and they look like the size that they are, right? Especially if they're at scale, up next to something recognizable, like a car, a fire hydrant. You know how tall they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's I think a key difference.
I saw this interesting statistic. I was doing some research into like online dating and Tinder stuff and things like this for a project I was doing, and I never forget. It said that the most successful photos for online dating for women was when they're looking at the camera, right? That's the ones that's going to get the most responses. For men, it was when they're looking away. So the woman is, if the successful photos for women are when they're looking at the camera and they have like a playful or something like that. I can't remember all the details, but I just remember reading for men, it was looking away. The men is not meant to look at the camera. It's meant to be a side or a profile thing.
That's interesting. That's the frontality thing, I think, coming in there, because it used to be, way back in the days of National Geographic, that there was a certain kind of power in being able to take a person's picture, but they don't look back. Like it's just like so I think that with women's pictures, a lot of times people are kind of afraid to look into the lens. It exhibits a little bit too directness because you want to look demure off into the side or something like that.
Yeah.
And with men, it's like, I am looking at you frontally.
Yeah.
Right. You don't get to look at me without, me knowing about it. Yeah. So that kind of makes a lot of sense in terms of.
That was always, I saw it in like South Park or something. Like, let's gaze off into the distance when we do our rock band photos
exactly.
or that kind of stuff. And over here, I've been to so many South Korean photo studios for like weddings and kids and things like that. And they love the concepts and they love being in the studio, and all the photos, they all kind of look the same after a while.
Yeah.
All the families get the same photos. They do the fairy off in the distance and then you dress them up as little Victorian English children, and then you do this concept. They love these studio photos over here. And it's a very big part of the culture, especially for families and young people. Where does the street come into it for you? This is like the ethnography, I guess, but it seems to be most of your photos are, they're not in the most, it's not like affluent, glitz, sparkling, because you can get those photos here, and maybe some of them are, but I normally associate them with like alleys and floors and brick and street. Where does that come in?
I think that comes in recently. So right now, the way that a lot of people in the who want to take pretty pictures think of pretty pictures is in the K-pop kind of thing, where you're perfect, your Photoshop is every aspect of your picture is Vogue, cover model perfect, which I think is kind of becoming stale because we're entering AI has been with us for a while, not just with Midjourney and ChatGPT, but all of these apps that can change your face. Yeah. But also, the thing that really has improved that a lot of people don't think about is skin smoothing is fucking amazing now. Because to do proper skin smoothing, I use a Russian retoucher when I do professional work because I don't have this.
Russian retoucher? Yeah. Okay.
So the Russian retouchers, which kind of became an issue with the war because they tried to cut off all the. So my retoucher was no longer able to use PayPal, and all these things happened. But she's like, no, I'll still retouch your stuff, but you have to get the money to my friend, and I'll get it.
Oh, that's not an app, but it's an actual Russian person.
That
retouches.
Yeah.
Sorry, I misunderstood it. I thought it was like Papago or Russian retouching. No, it's a person.
So so to do proper retouching of a face, there's a lot of techniques. I mean, to make basically to smooth out the skin, but preserve the texture. That's actually really difficult to do. The early apps would just smooth your skin over, just like with like a digital butter knife, just and smooth it over, and it just looks super fake and plastic. But a human retoucher who's really good at it, the stuff that we see all the time on the cover of Vogue, that looks natural, but people do complain about the fact that, it's maybe too overdone because we can't tell what's real. But the reason you can't tell it's not real is because real professionals have looked it over. And they keep the skin texture proper. So my Russian retoucher, I send her, some files for when I have clients that want to have a portfolio done. I do a headshot. I'm like, I don't even want to talk about my Photoshop skills. I'm not qualified. I send her the shots, $15 a shot. She sends them back. And she can do things like she can remove braces without a trace, no trace of braces. She can change things. She can add and remove hairs in different parts of the face. So that kind of stuff, that's what professionals do. But nowadays, Face App, for example, which I use, their skin smoothing isn't that level, but it's in between what it used to be and, I guess, top level. You can skin smooth and it preserves texture. That's all AI. But using that kind of stuff.
The big thing on TikTok at the moment, 'cause I've been doing some research on that for stuff, is teenage. There's this teenage thing, and you look into it, and it shows you when you're a teenager on the top and bottom in real time, and it's messed up because it's not a Russian retoucher levels, but it's pretty good, and you get lots of people standing there with their mum, and then they turn on the effect, and the mum sees her face all touched up and things like that, and you just see them like crying or seeing what they looked like.
I haven't seen myself since.
That is kind of interesting. Before we get on to the actual models or the women and the people that you work with.
Hey, we're not getting on to women.
I get my language wrong all the time, right? Yeah. It's this idea of how much of it is real then, because if you're doing this street photography and it's about getting it real and it's about getting it uncut, or maybe I'm misunderstanding it, that's why I'm asking you. It's like getting the real uncut, but then you retouch it and you do it this to make them longer than they are and taller than they are. Where's the line between the reality and the fantasy? And maybe I have this naive romantic idea of what street fashion is or street photography. Do you ever come into like debate how much it should be real and how much work you should do on the images? Do you get what I mean? What I'm trying to ask you?
But frankly, I'm too lazy to work over images. So I just try to take my whole thing is very analog focused or oriented. I just try to take the perfect picture with the lighting, angle, shutter, everything is perfect, one shot, JPEG, no RAW. I just don't want to waste the space or time. I'm just when you do professional work, like a headshot for somebody's comp card, their model portfolio card, it's got to be worked over. Not too much, but you can't be leaving pimples and obvious things in there. So nothing is real. Now, a person's digitals, like just the straight shots of them wearing like, basic black jeans and like a T-shirt or something, which are supposed to show what they look like in reality, that's different. But you have to work fashion stuff. You have to work over. But my thing is the K-pop aesthetic of beauty is too perfect. Yeah. And it's uninteresting. So that's why my aesthetic has always been street, kind of documentary. But it's hard. The thing that's frustrating about that, it's hard to capture that perfect moment by waiting for it to happen with somebody. Waiting around a corner. It starts feeling creepy too. So as I went with the portraiture, I went to the studio direction and started having models come in and do concepts that, evoked these kind of things in gender and culture. And as I connected with the huge avalanche of wannabe Instagram models here, a lot of whom are not doing the same thing that's going on in the States, which is just like thirst trapping and trying to get all the hits. There's a lot of that, but there are people who are trying to do a lot of the Instagram models and creators trying to do concepts. They're basically doing mini editorials for like a theoretical magazine. And what you start noticing is the hashtags in these concepts tend to be really gritty. The back alleys, what's a really common theme these days is, women who have like bruises and bleeding on their face, and so that's part of the whole, in a way, the gangster genre of films in Korea. The high school girl who's a tough girl is bullied, and she gets slapped by someone. Her face turns around, she looks back, and she's angry, and there's a little blood there, and then she gets into a scuffle, and she looks a little scuffed up, but she won the fight. So that's one of the concepts I did recently with a model on Instagram, and she always is doing stuff like that. So that kind of aesthetic is called hashtag tweepemi.
Tweepemi.
Yeah, so like the beauty of kind of grunge, the beauty of like decay, of fallen aesthetic.
So me is the beauty.
Me, twepe is like decayed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
because your photos, just to compare them, and you've got so many photos, so I haven't seen them all. I do apologize. But the ones that I have seen recently, and trying to prepare to talk to you, the people in your photos, they have face piercings, they have tattoos, they smoke cigarettes, they're standing around beer, they might have condom packets in their hand or something like this. That's very different from the K-pop aesthetic. It is kind of, I'm not sure what the word is. Maybe it's this decayed aesthetic because it's kind of like grungy, or it has this kind of, but it's almost sexier than the K-pop thing is.
I feel like that. I mean, you mentioned the one with the condom.
Was that a condom packet or not?
The
Was
condom
kind
packet,
of ripping it with her mouth, yeah.
So I feel like if I want to have a sexy concept, so that was actually for a jewelry brand. She was wearing this jewelry piece that it was this, was it a titanium hammer?
Okay.
So basically, you have to
I missed that. I just saw the condom with the piercing, yeah.
So she's got this hammer there. The makeup guy, the jewelry guy was like... their whole thing, what do they call? What's the jewelry brand? Crap.
We'll edit it in there.
Yeah, it's a very edgy name.
Okay.
And they're all about like, yeah, we want you to do the stuff that you do to make our stuff look cool. Mm-hmm. So, and that model, she's got piercings, tats, the whole thing. She was like, yeah, I want to do all that stuff. I'm cool with
Hannah.
Hannah.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, if I'm gonna get a close-up shot of her face, what would be a edgy thing for someone to be doing? And I'm just like, so thinking about the angle, there's something semiotically edgy, bold, perhaps too much, almost pornographic. But see, my whole trick is I don't like to show people doing things on camera, like kissing, tonguing. I don't, obviously body parts go into other body parts. Implication, I think, is much better. So I take the camera angle up, and she's down on the ground looking up into the camera. That implies a sort of sexual relationship position. One is a woman kneeling vis-a-vis the male, the ostensible male, in the camera. And at the same time, she's got the condom package half ripped open as she's, so what's about to happen here?
Yeah, it makes sense to me now. I never
and then in the background,
it's pretty edgy stuff.
Yeah, and all she's doing is ripping open a piece of plastic and doing something that most kids should know how to do at this point if they've got a proper sex education. I mean, you're not actually doing anything in the picture, but it's like, oh my God, that's beyond the pale.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's one way I kind of stick my middle finger to that kind of propriety. But actually, no one's done anything on camera. There's no nipples. There's not even anything really being shown. But I get a reputation for my feed as being really risque. And I'm like, if you look at it, in Korean, people talk about nochu nomi. So I've heard this from models that I've DM'd. I'm like, hey, you want to collab? And they're like, oh, nochu nomi money. I'm like, too much exposure of sensitive parts. And I'm like, actually, if you look at my feed, you'll notice that there's not a lot of nochu. There's not a lot. There's a lot of implied things. Like, it feels very naughty to like have the person kneeling in relation to the camera and ripping open a condom package. There's not even actually a condom in there. That's just the package. So,
I noticed this in the Glory Mic, which was that, I don't know if you saw it, but I did some work on it, which is the new big drama at the moment with Song Hye-kyo. And in that drama, the bad guys in it, they have sex. They have sex because they're bad, and they're bad because they have sex. And Song Hye-kyo and her partner, they live in the same kind of house together. They cook each other breakfast. They talk to each other. They might occasionally kind of hold a hand, but they don't have sex. They don't have sex because they're good, and they're good because they don't have sex.
Yeah.
And that portrayal is still kind of predominant. It's hard in Korea, I find, in mainstream culture, in that kind of thing, to be sexually active or have agency and be an ambiguous character. It's like it's still associated with negativity, and the good characters don't have sex like that.
yeah, that's really a strong cultural bias to a huge fault. So you set off a memory. So I taught inside the first Korean boarding school, and yes,
Boys or girls or both? Both. Oh,
yeah.
shit.
So that was a tough sell for a lot of parents.
Yeah.
And so basically, I went to Phillips Academy Andover, which they modeled their disciplinary policy off of our Blue Book. We had this thing called the Blue Book, and it was like the Bible of discipline, like all the official rules. Like if you wanted to not get caught doing something, you'd look it up in the Blue Book, Section 1, and that sort of thing. So they were like, we're gonna like use Andover's Blue Book to like base our disciplinary policies on. And I was like, and they asked me about it. They were like, you went there. What do you think of that? I was like, that's a horrible idea. They're like, well, why? And I'm like, the Blue Book, all the rules are based off a basic idea that we have a certain degree of autonomy as young adults. And in the rules in relation to sexual, well, not sex, but like, possible intimate romantic relations between young people, is we had this thing called parietals. So it was different depending on your house, but the house counselor would make up a set of rules. Depending on your grade, you could like bring a girl as a guy into the room and be alone together with the door closed, and even be in the bed together doing things. And there was a very strong kind of sex education policy and support network. So if you ended up getting pregnant, they didn't treat it as a disciplinary thing. They were like, how can we help you solve this problem? Like, what do we do? It wasn't like you're kicked out. So I was like, you can't adopt the Blue Book because the policy of this school was no sexual relations of any kind. So their whole zero tolerance thing was, if you hold hands, you're kicked out. If you find out that you're dating anyway, you're automatically kicked out. And I was like, that is going to lead to disaster, because you're either going to stick to the policy and destroy the faith of the students, or you're going to start making excuses and exceptions, and that's going to destroy your authority.
Yeah.
And they were like, no. And I was like, kids are going to fuck. I was like, just straight up, their puberty is when your body pumps you full of 4 times the testosterone or estrogen that you will have later in your life, and basically soaks every cell in your body in like sex juice. That's what puberty is. It's like you're werewolves of sex. I mean,
that's a good concept. Being done. It's like,
there's no way to stop it.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is to educate kids so they don't get knocked up, so that they don't get STDs. Right, you put the fear of God into them with actual education, and they're like, so the person I was talking to was like, no, that's not going to happen, and I was like, they're gonna have sex, and her actual words to me was, good students don't have sex, and I was like, yo, don't make me tell you things, because the foreign teachers at that boarding school started becoming the antenna and ears for all of the real deal stuff on the campus. And so I had this young Japanese major I don't even know if that's important information or sensitive information at this point. She was like the bad girl in the school, and she was in my podcasting club, and she just loved to tell all, and she was like, "Oh yeah, there's a love motel in Bundang that only caters to underage kids.
Oh man,
That's where everybody goes to fuck." And I was like, "Oh, really? That's interesting." Because she knew I wasn't going to snitch, so they would tell things to me. And I said this to the person. I was like, trying to shock her into reality. I said to this teacher, there's actually a love motel in Bundang where kids go to have sex. They're having sex at this school. I know kids who are having sex. And she was like, "Who?" And I was like, this isn't a disciplinary problem. I'm not going to snitch on no kids, but you need to deal with this as a health education issue if you want to use blue book rules. Otherwise this shit's going to fall apart. So yeah, that attitude of good students don't have sex was a huge issue.
Now the government's doing everything it can to make people have sex. It's like, give us babies, like or you can avoid your military service or do what you've got to do to get out of it. And I think it should also be pointed out that if you went back like a few decades in the United Kingdom, where I'm from, or maybe the US, they would have been pretty Puritan sometimes in their attitudes.
Well,
they're in different trajectories, aren't they?
I mean, if you think about the US right now, right this second, the David statue in Florida, and
it's mental, man.
Yeah,
I
can't really beat up on Korea for the sake of beating up on Korea on that, but at the same time, when you talk about aesthetics, you talk about the beauty and the all that stuff, there is this sense that sex is bad.
Yeah.
But, in fashion, you can't be a fashion industry and not mitigate the sexual drive because it's there. And you got to – sometimes you have to have a sexy concept. And even that idea in Korean photo talk, sexy concept, sexy doesn't necessarily mean as sexy as here. As in the States, but it's definitely a thing you can propose. Like, let's do a thing like with, like a student uniform, which is that's the main mode of arguing a certain kind of coy, feminine, like sexuality.
When I was at university, like school discos were a huge thing. Like university students, we'd dress up and go to them. But it's big over here as well, isn't it?
The kyobok, the schoolgirl uniform, is literally a mode of femininity unto itself. Like, as you can see in the extreme fetishization of the schoolgirl, the high school girl who's bad, she smokes, and that's a huge thing.
The Lolita thing. Yeah. The smoking is a thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why it comes up a lot in my photography, because in Korean culture, smoking, like similar to like people who have sex, smoking is for bad people, for whores, because it's a very gendered thing. It's not a bad thing necessarily for men, but women who smoke, because in the times we're talking about, the 90s, women used to hide out in the bathroom and smoke like crazy, chain smoke like crazy. It was also a weight loss, weight control thing, but that's why a lot of my pictures, the ones who want to do the bad concept, they're like, "Oh, can I smoke?" In fact, the recent round of pictures I took with this model who's walking at Fashion Week, so she's more of one of the pro models these days. She was really sheepish because she was doing all these bad looks, and I mean her whole look from when I saw her on the ramp out there at DDP was like this bad girl leather jacket, wet hair look. That's one of the trends I was trying to get. I was like, you do this wet hair look, and you're obviously a model because you're 6 feet tall, and you have the look, and she's super talented. So we went actually off to the side, not on the DDP ramp, to like shoot in the street. And I was like, you're throwing this like super 90s heroin chic, bad back alley, like I'm about to like fight you kind of vibe. And like that, she's throwing that, and she's like, oh, I'm very sorry, but do you mind if I smoke? So she meant to just take a smoke in between shooting, and she wanted to sneak off to the side. She was hiding the fact she was smoking. I was like, I really don't care at all. She's like, really? I don't want to get the smoke on you. She's super polite. And I'm like, I don't care. If you want to smoke in the shot, it seems like that's kind of your personality.
It's heroin chic right
Yeah.
there.
And she was like, can I? I was like, listen, we're going to work together more. You don't have to hold any shit back. So she just started. So she just said, as long as I don't bother you with the smoke. I was like, just get over it and just do your thing. And she just was smoking. It was just, I was like, that's actually much better than any of the stuff we just shot up to. You are putting that out there. And that's her real personality.
That's honest.
But the thing is, that's really different in terms of social change. If we go back 15 years, which seems like a long time, but it's not that long ago. Like a lot of people, even if they're like, are those people hardcore, like edgy, dark personalities, they would never be caught dead smoking in public, let alone on camera. So that in itself is a big change because a lot of the younger, like I want to do edgy concepts models are like, I want to smoke on camera, which is, so that brings up another issue of agency because the question I get often is, why do you make your models smoke? And this comes from American white women, generally, who sometimes write a separate DM or even an email, and are like, I have a problem with how you're promoting smoking and then you're making your models do all these things. And I'm like, back the fuck up. First of all, why are you assuming that I, as the male photographer, possess all the agency here?
Yeah.
Like, why are you assuming that this is my concept to begin with? And why you assume I'm making anyone do anything? So who's got the weird assumptions here? Like, who's actually got extremely gendered, sexist assumptions about how these photographs are made? Because I'm just like, in many of the cases, especially in Korea, there's this notion, somewhat orientalist, simplistic notion that Korean women are a certain way and they would never do certain things. Especially older Korean people have these ideas.
Yeah.
So when they see like people if they happen to see a picture of Korean women doing these things, they assume it must be because I, as the American, made them do these things.
Corrupted the youth.
Yeah,
mate.
and I'm like, trust me, I'm just pushing buttons. I'm just trying to keep up.
Yeah.
I mean, I have my own tendencies and my own aesthetic preferences, but I'm just matching. The reason they even gravitate towards me on Instagram is that we're matching our aesthetics.
Yeah.
Like most, even like innocent, there are some models who are like, I want to do innocent, pretty things. I'm like, yeah, that's good for me to do because I don't do a lot of the innocent, pretty, like sniffing a flower, That's a huge thing.
I did see a couple of videos of I was like, is that really your one? I'd stop and go like, wow, that's really different. But
I try to switch it up a little bit.
Let me, as somebody that used to smoke a lot, if I watch a drama or a movie, I can tell if that character is actually smoking the cigarette or not. Do you know what I mean? If they're taking it down or if they're used to smoking, you can see someone and they never actually take a drag or it always cuts away at the right time. So I'm used to seeing people smoking authentically and people not. And in your photos, people are smoking authentically. It's not being used as a prop. You can see how they can and do smoke. Just to go on this, when I first arrived, I used to teach this a businesswoman in Gwanghwamun, in the big duty-free building, the Donghua duty-free building. And we used to go down and smoke cigarettes during break because I used to teach with her for like an hour and a half. I was teaching her English. And we'd go down halfway and we'd smoke cigarettes. But she'd say to me, I'd only been here a couple of months. She'd say to me, if anyone comes up to me, just pretend I'm Japanese. Because men would slap her in the street. This was what she told me. I never saw the slaps, but she told me, if anyone comes up to me, just pretend I'm Japanese or do that.
Or speak loudly in English.
Because she would get physically assaulted by people who would find it offensive for her to be smoking out in the street. And that's not that long ago. Now it's very empowering at the university. See all the women smoke. Not all the women. I see lots of young women smoking and cigarettes on the table. Can I ask you about this? Because you mentioned it briefly a little bit, but about how shoulders are sexy in Korea and things like in these traditional things. And it is changing. Crop tops have become a thing now. But like some of my students will say, crop tops are okay, but under boob is too much. And they're having these discussions. But we went to a Nepalese wedding and my wife was wearing my wife's Korean, but she was wearing a traditional Nepalese dress that they'd prepared for her. Shows the neck and shoulders. And my wife was like, I can't show my shoulders. Do you know what I mean? Like she would wear miniskirts and hot pants, but she's like, I can't show my shoulders. Get me a shawl.
Yeah.
And so she did. And so there are these culturally different things about what's sexy. And Koreans don't want to show up here, the cleavage.
no
They'll
cleavage.
protect this.
Yeah.
They'll have hot pants on. It is a bit different here, isn't it? What's sexy, what's not. Do you have any insight into some of those things or what some of those things are?
I just feel like from what because I've been here since it was, yes, okay. And I think that's a lot of things that's the sort of Korea people have forgotten about. When it was perfectly okay to slap a woman in the street for smoking, who you don't know, and you're putting your hands on a person in what would be now considered a assault, right? But it was just like, if you went to the police station like that guy, I mean, he didn't punch you in the face, but he slapped you, as a warning. I mean, he'd be taken away, but now, but back then, it was just like, well, you shouldn't have been smoking.
Yeah.
Why were you smoking?
Violent, man.
Yeah. And all of those things, I feel like when you look at smoking in the cultural context here, that's a reason, I think, why so many young women who want to be badasses, their first move is, I want to smoke. And a lot of them actually do smoke. So,
let's talk about some of the models,
Yeah.
if we can, because a lot of people might have these vision of Korea but through K-dramas and things like that. What can you tell us about the women that you work with? As it's sabasa, everyone's different, but like, what about these women, these Korean women?
So going back to like the picture booths and the studios, and so the thing that Korean young people have, especially women, is this hugely developed photographic visual habitus, right? I got dragged on Korean social media for saying habitus. They're like, it's French, it's habitus. I'm like, I'm not trying to be a dick and pronounce French words properly as an American.
This is cultural appropriation, mate.
Habitus. So like the kind of embodied knowledge you have about certain things, like an accent that you picked up going to a fancy Harry Potter style school is a sort of educational embodied habitus.
Yeah.
And, if you're raised on picture booths, if you're raised on the cell phone cameras in the Samsung days, because a lot of the people who are, early 20s now, they were once, even back in like the early 2000s, they had cell phones on their cameras because Korea was first with that being, easy to access. Psy World, a whole bunch of other photographic practices. The idea that you can just sit up in the subway and just do, like hardcore selfie work and not be embarrassed about that.
Not at all.
That's part of the Korean habitus.
Yeah.
Right? So that was a prelude to, I'm blanking on your question a little bit.
Like the women that you...
Yeah.
So we spoke a little bit, I think, about Hannah, but when you're because these are real Korean young women today, right? And so I'm just trying to get so they smoke, and do you get any other sense from them? Is there well, if you're going to shoot young Korean women in Korea like this, what's part of the habitus? What do you need to know? What goes on with these people? What vibe do you get from them? Who are they? And who's contacting you?
I think what's driving them is a similar thing that's driving folks outside of Korea, which is they want to get the street cred, they want to get the followers, they want to get the likes, they want to be more popular, and it's very monetized here in a way that it isn't in the States, because a lot of influencers, they try to front like they make money. American influencers, unless you're at a higher level, you don't really make any money. You don't really live off that shit. I mean, you'd have to really convince me that there is. I mean, you're getting you signed a contract, you're getting money from some big company. I think in the States there tends to be that level of commercialization on Instagram if you have a certain number of followers.
Right.
But at the bottom level, you're just doing Fashion Nova. It's bullshit. Like that's why the whole the jewelry people who send you the whole things. Hey, if you collaborate with us, we'll send you the jewelry 50% off. And it's basically a way of maintaining the fantasy that you're an influencer, but you're basically a consumer.
Yeah.
You're a customer.
Yeah.
So, to talk about the Korean end of things, you have to talk about pay modeling. The pay model.
Okay.
That's a hashtag in a thing.
Right.
a Korean payee model. So you've got everyday girls, like they're everyday. They're not an agency. They're not in any special status. 22-year-old kid in college, kind of cute, kind of pretty. Got something going, and has, before going into pay modeling, maybe what is the average number of followers you may have? 600. If you have a lot, 800, 900, probably 334, whatever.
Yeah.
That's what normal people have. But you start getting requests, you start posing for the basically a guild of highly developed, very advanced amateur male photographers in Korea who meet in these things called chulsa studios, chulsa 사진작가, chulsa photographers. So basically, guilds of photographers who, before Instagram, like in the early 2000s, would go on like down cafes and they would organize these shoots with like racing models, the ones who would, at their car shows and stuff. It's like semi-professional models. And they'd get really hot racing models and studios or certain enterprising men would book them for like $500 an hour. And if you're a racing model, you're like, you're going to pay me hundreds of dollars an hour to do what I do normally?
Fuck yeah.
Okay. And go to a rental studio, and what they do is, everybody gets like 30, 40, a minute, 30 seconds shooting with that person, and you get your one-on-one time. So it looks like you are just shooting that person, and you get your shots, and you look really cool. But these guilds of chulsa photographers, they were very highly developed. And that was before Instagram. Then Instagram hit Korea, like, for the most part in 2014, and it was just like, if you could easily turn your Instagram prettiness, your follower counts, to a lesser extent, into doing photo shoots with individual photographers. You didn't have to share anymore, so it was a good thing. So a normal pay model who does like daily, basically like fashionable, casual kinds of wear, not showing a lot, might get 35,000 won an hour, booked in, groups of 3 hours. What's 35 times 3? 105?
Yeah.
So 105 per shoot. I'm going to have to get to my calculator here. And maybe you do a couple of those on the weekdays and one on the weekend. Let's say you do 3 a week.
300,000.
105 times 3.
315.
Yeah. Okay. So you're quicker than me. So 315 times 4 for the month.
1,200 and then something with all the
so like
1.2
mil a month.
Yeah.
Which, if you live at home, and it's much better than going to a coffee shop and making that money.
Yeah.
And you're doing what you want to do, and you increase your social cred, your street cred, your social capital, all that stuff.
Pretty. You get people telling you pretty all the time.
You get to be a model, right? And you're not asking your parents for any spending money, because if you're doing basic stuff, that's cool. 35,000 or so. Add a little bit of fishnet stockings, shorter skirts, maybe 50,000 or so. A little bit more risque, a little bit more. A lot of the male photographers, Korean male photographers, want you to wear like a Sailor Moon uniform, like bringing uniforms, put in like fetishy stuff on you. You're talking 75, 100,000 an hour.
It's getting towards cosplay stuff, is it?
So when you're a hardcore cosplay, which is actually where a lot of these guilds of photographers really gravitated towards. Yeah. Because you get lots of young, extremely pretty, often underage girls who are putting on extremely crazy fetish stuff. And you're like, hey, I'll be your photographer. Come meet me in a cafe and be my special friend or whatever. But anyway, that fits the need. And if you can charge, if you're willing to wear like the Japanese manokinis and like the crazy fetish wear.
Manokinis.
Oh, manokini. So basically like...
It's that Borat thing, no?
Yeah, it's the Borat thing, except it's basically enough fabric to cover your pudendum. That's it. It's very revealing. If you can handle that, you're talking 150,000 an hour. maybe 200 if you can pull that off. Let's say you're pulling off 200,000 an hour in blocks of 3, 600,000 a shoot. And I know a couple models who are so booked solid, you can't even get a slot in. They're like 1 up every weekday in the evening, 2 up morning, evening on the weekends. We're talking 10 shoots a week at, let's say, 500,000 a shot.
Instagram is big business, isn't it?
For everyday people, not like up there. You're not a Kardashian. You're not signing formal contracts. You're not doing any of that stuff. So, I mean, if you want to, you can kind of adjust the meter to where you're comfortable. But there are a lot of people doing this.
Because you mentioned mankinis and things like this, I got a couple of really good questions from Elle on Twitter. She was sending amazing questions. This was one that I would never have thought of. Is there a Harajuku in Korea?
No.
So Harajuku, and then I had Harajuku is like it's a bridge in Tokyo where people cosplay.
Yeah.
Like getting it right.
The Yoyogi Park area. I went there once, so I figured it out.
Okay.
But there's no Harajuku now. I mean, there is, but it's gone. In fact, Shoichi Aoki, the man who was behind Fruits, and like the reason we know anything about Japanese fashion, that was all his work.
Fruits.
Fruits is like the magazine he published of the Gothic Lolitas and all the crazy, the Mamba girls and all that stuff. The Japanese crazy fashion that we know is from that guy.
Oh, wow.
And so he's very famously, I think in 2018, was like, Harajuku is dead. It's officially gone. And I went around then, I was like, I got what he was saying. Because there's this idea of Harajuku where you have like there was an original Harajuku where you had like these disaffected kids who like could express their, otherization in society through their weird clothing. They made this subculture, an actual subculture with different values and things in the mainstream culture, right? And like it was legitimately a thing. Like they would get together and, bond and perform social actions through their clothes.
Yeah.
And that was a thing. But now all the kids who dress up that way are just going there because that's what you're supposed to do in Harajuku. It has nothing to do with any subculture. It's just like you go there and you walk around that. It's like an amusement park. So
It's an aesthetic rather than actual community and shared culture and values and stuff.
And then his point, well, that's my thing I noticed. You can find people who dress up the Harajuku way that you can see in the pictures on the internet. But his point was there's no fashion center. There's no culture here. What killed Harajuku and all that stuff was basically Uniqlo, was basically all the fast fashion outlets with commercialization. Everybody can dress whatever the way they want to. You don't have to go to Yoyogi Park and like meet your weird like subcultural friends and like do your weird stuff anymore. You can just do it anywhere. Anybody can do it. So, but there was never a Harajuku in Korea.
Okay.
Hongdae is like, they both start with H. I once wrote an article called "Move Over Harajuku." Now there's Hongdae, just to be trite and whatever.
Yeah.
But there isn't that thing. There's never been that kind of hardcore subculture of clothing. Maybe there's some punk stuff that I think is more arguably that, but like Harajuku style actual clothing subculture that is linked to some youth that hang out in a particular place. I mean, a little bit. You could talk about the Hongdae Park, which has now been turned into a place that's physically difficult to like meet inside. There's like metal coverings and but that place was never that thing. I mean, if anything, Hongdae Park was a place for youth to come together and kind of just hang out, drink,
busk, drink,
But it wasn't like that in a fashion sense.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah. So there isn't a Harajuku in Korea. The closest I think you could get is Hongdae is a place where there is a more open idea. And people do dress up to go to different neighborhoods in different ways. So if you want to dress up like a Gothic Lolita or you want to wear the shortest street legal skirt in the world, you do it in Hongdae. You don't do it on your way to work at Chongno.
No, there are different parts. Yeah, there's different sort of goes. I played concerts in the middle of the Hongdae. They were like the park there, man. They used to be such a good place, and then I think gentrification. Maybe this is just me and my old boomer thing, but it seems to have changed. A lot of that punk thing started going out to places like Mule, to the industrial sectors, when rent started getting higher and things like that. I sometimes see some of the costumes and outfits like down in Cheongdam and things like that.
Yeah.
And you're just always in these absolutely different worlds. When we speak about social media and Instagram and followers and things like that, go for it, man. Whatever you want. Like
Fishing my bottle out.
Yeah. You said that sometimes white American women give you jip about your people smoking. What positive, like how is it being received today? You got thousands of followers. You got people looking at your work. You've got all this content going there. What's the positive response? And I guess I also want to ask is, does Hallyu help this? Because like Korea's now fucking cool, man. If you just put "made in Korea," people are after it. I love that. It's not a meme, but that quote, you guys would stan a squirrel if it were Korean. There's this idea that just to be Korean is enough to... Where's the positivity coming towards your work at the moment?
I feel like, I don't know if there's... I mean, the positivity towards pictures I put up comes from people I know through Instagram who already follow me, generally. And sometimes I'll get, extra pictures, and I'll get, like, more comments. Like, that's fire, man, the fire emoji or something. But I think that Hallyu kind of creates more room to be able to do this kind of stuff. And I do, to speak to Hallyu, I do think I have this theory going that there is this nascent, I never use this word aloud. Nascent, yeah. Feminist movement that is, it's not being argued in the same way that, American feminism, like we talk about in the 70s, for example, is very much like embodied by the burning of the bras. It's very political. It's signs. Yeah. It's the pussy hat. That's basically white American feminist like action.
I don't know the pussy hat. I'm going to Google that. I have to be careful how I Google that.
Yeah, you're.
but the burning of the bras approach.
Put Trump in front of that. That'll focus the. Yeah. So, but the ridiculous. I might get shit for this too. The ridiculous response after Trump won and the right wingers had their regime in place was to weave a pussy hat and go, just like, what? This is what we're doing. Like, I'm more of the type of like, let's go fucking burn a store down. Like, go and throw Molotov cocktails at these fuckers. Like, these people are gonna come for you. They're gonna come for us. This is not. Anyway, I'm just over, social media activism. And what stopped Trump? Political action, like actual efficacious shit. Anyway, sorry, I'm diverging.
Hallyu has some feminism to it, or Hallyu has some nascent?
So I feel like Korean feminist, you can't call yourself a feminist in Korea without ending your shit. You get canceled. Yeah, that's real canceled.
Yeah. Strong shit.
They try to pin down that archer, the Olympic archer.
Ansan.
Yeah. And I thought her kind of non-response response was basically like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just busy out here winning fucking gold medals.
Like, so, she wasn't just an archer; she's gold medal winner.
So I'm
multiple.
winning. I'm not a daepyo. I don't know what you're fucking talking about. So she was, I kind of heard Jay-Z in her response. She's like, I'm in my G4. I don't hear your fucking corny raps. I'm up here fucking in the sky. I'm doing actual things. So, but she had to be like, I'm not a feminist. I don't know what you're talking about. Even when BB made that Animal Farm video where she's like slicing dudes' heads off, whose faces are literally pigs, men as pigs, in the kind of reenactment of the Tarantino scene. And I was like, that's pretty straightforwardly a feminist kind of semiotics here. And she's like, yeah. So when she's pushed on it on the internet, she's like, yeah, I'm not a feminist. What are you talking about? That's just my favorite scene in the movie. This means nothing, nothing to see here. I was like, okay, cool. I know why you have to say that, because they'll come after you, these weirdo Ilbe Meninists. But I think that the argument for the feminism is sort of being argued or presented through aesthetics, like some of the people who are doing what I would arguably call performance art. If this might be a good time to put up a picture from one of my favorite new models, 9 Minute. That's her.
Okay.
That's her Instagram, and her pictures are like strong. So I saw her pictures coming across my feed because we algorithm into the same groove as certain people. So when I saw her stuff coming across my feed, I was like, whoa, who is she? What is she doing? And where are these skills coming from? But so when we gelled.
Who is she? Just before you, who is 9 Minute? Because I can't visualize her.
9 Minute. Do we have time for me to bring her up on Instagram?
Yeah, you find her.
Okay, I'll show you.
I'll say something while you look for her, and I'm suddenly 9 minutes. So it's like it's 9 Minute in English.
Yeah. So I forgot the pun, but I mean her actual name is Sumin, but
okay.
But Kubun, that's her nickname. It comes from some aspect of her. Anyway, I think you can.
Can I see it?
Yeah, let me get that. So you can kind of see what she's doing. That's not your typical Instagram thirst trap. She uses a lot of her body and sexiness in there, but she's like, she's got blood and scars she puts on herself. She's like walking barefoot through the snow with blood coming off of her feet, and there's some pretty clear kind of feminist themed things there. So by any definition we would have of a performance artist, like a Nancy Lang, going back to some people who are more famous, like why am I blanking?
8,000 followers, basically, this woman has there. Yeah. She reminds me of Patti Smith. I don't know why, but Patti Smith, that kind of heroin chic, the very angular and the hair coming down. You don't see the eyes. And
yeah, she's got a very, why am I blanking? The most famous...
Kate Moss.
No, the most famous performance artist. She's now credited with inventing the selfie. Hey Siri, who invented the selfie?
Come on, Siri.
Oh, the first known self-portrait was 1839. That's not what I'm looking
There's no way.
Give me a second, because I want to talk about her.
Yeah, okay.
Because, every time I try to think of something, of course, blank.
Yeah.
Hey Siri, open Chrome. Why can't I get anything done?
Surely it's quicker just to press button, Mike.
Oh, I don't know where.
Yeah, all right.
Oh,
all right.
I don't know. I actually, just in doing this, Cindy Sherman.
Cindy Sherman.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who's now kind of, her name has come up again because she's been in some TV shows.
Right.
Her name's been mentioned. But Cindy Sherman was basically an acting out moments. She had this series called Film Stills. So she basically made a series of theoretical stills from a production of an actual film, where she acted out like roles. But a lot of them very centrally circle around gender. So she's got ones where she's kind of crying. She's like on the ground. She's like looking like she's just been hit by a man or something. And it's like weird because, in the 60s? Why are you going around putting on makeup and, outfits and acting out roles for your still camera? You have your friend take a picture, or in her case, her dad took some of the pictures. Why would you do that? It was just weird. But when she started making this her art, and this is the first time anybody had done anything like this. Or Nikki S. Lee, who did this in the 90s. She's a Korean performance artist who was doing, she was like acting out social roles. She would actually go into communities. She actually went into the Deep South and lived with the KKK for like several weeks and took pictures in a way as quote unquote white trash. And she like lived with them, she became them, and she did portraits of herself as them. It's kind of controversial nowadays. You wouldn't get away with that because
Is that
people,
ethnography? You were talking
I
about
would say that's a very deep, respectable kind of ethnography.
Yeah.
But people would be tripped up by her so-called cultural appropriation, which I think is a questionable word unto itself. Anyway, she did that with black hip hoppers in New York. She lived as a black person. I think she kind of tanned or darkened her skin somewhat. I mean, not in a tasteless way, but it just, the picture she took kind of fit. She did this with skaters. She was a stripper. She did all these social roles. And yeah, she got a lot of respect and accolades for that as an artist. So she became quite famous. But basically what 9 Minute is doing is that.
performance.
So she's doing some straight up Cindy Sherman shit right here. Her whole feed going back a long way, well before I met her. So, I mean, some of her better stuff, and of course she's smoking a little bit. She's got a white wig. She's very good with makeup.
Is there a name sort of, I get this wrong, but I'm thinking of the Japanese movie The Ring.
Yeah.
And then also, if you look at, there's a lot of Korean horror movies where they would use the female ghost. I forgot her name. I don't want to say it wrong, like Chanyeol-gushin or something like this, with the hair coming over, the faceless. That has roots in Korean culture as well, doesn't it? This idea. Is there any element of that going on in there, in this thing? It plays up this kind of.
I'm not sure, but most of the stuff that I see her referring to, I mean, she's referring to the like movie / television media habitus that she has. So I don't know in her other work, but definitely she puts on these Sailor Moon things, and she's playing with the concept. She's definitely.
How old is she?
She's 23.
She looks very young. That's the idea, isn't it?
That's her thing. She knows. She's an adept. She knows exactly what she's doing. So she put on that Sailor Moon thing, and the white socks, the pose, the fact that the way she does her makeup,
or the manhwa or the comics around her. It looks
she went to a manhwa bang.
Yeah,
like she's setting what I call. I think she's my way of looking at how I think Korean feminists are going to establish feminist. Goals to get them done is to set logic bombs. So a logic bomb. I like this idea. But I'm not a computer science person. So basically, you set up all these things such that when certain conditions are met, this is like vicious code kind of thing.
If A then B, that kind of stuff.
And like a whole bunch of things line up, then the bomb goes off and just destroys the system. So in a way. That's kind of the thing that I tend to want to do is I like to play with existing media tropes, and then you set the trap, you pull them in, and someone like her, she's doing exactly what a lot of men like. She looks like a little kid. She's got her cute little socks on. I mean,
I'd feel dangerous about liking that photo a little bit, Mike.
Oh.
Do you know what?
Yeah.
But you get what I mean by that. Like, but it's only suggestive. There's nothing actually bad in the content. It's all just playing on subconscious desires and tropes and concepts.
Yeah.
So on concepts, are there any? You mentioned cultural appropriation a bit, and how that's difficult. Are there any concepts that are offline? Are there any concepts that are like and this might not be as interesting to you, but Elle as well on Twitter, she asked, for you, the question, can Korean celebrities and K-pop stars still feign ignorance about swastikas and mushroom clouds in their fashion? They're very extreme examples. But K-pop and it's always been about concepts, right?
Yeah.
They've always done that. Let's do cheerleaders. Now let's do this. And with the globalization, some people are saying, like, those concepts, you can't quite do that.
Yeah.
Are there any concepts that are
Off limits?
off limits or a bit like you would be a bit touchy about? Or tell me about concepts.
No, really.
Okay.
Of this concept, the Sailor Moon thing, the schoolgirl uniform that's sexualized, I'm just like, all my models want to do it. I want to do that and set the trap. You know, I want to work with that cliche. But there are models who are like, yeah, I don't put on uniforms. I don't do kyobo. I'm not going to touch that at all. So, I mean, I personally do whatever the model wants to do. I'm trying to think if there's been one. I don't think there's anything I've been like, yeah, let's not do that. I don't think so.
Do you mess with religion? You doing like dog collars and or crosses or anything like that?
I mean, I don't really, but I think a few people have in the pictures.
Does race ever come into it? So if they say, I want to do this kind of thing, or I want to do these hairstyles, I don't know your take on all this, but it's just a genuine question. They say, and I might get the words wrong, they want to do braids or they like this, because that's kind of common here.
Yeah.
Does that ever come into it?
If they did, I don't think that many people do, but that's not there. So of the models who want to do stuff with me, they're not really that cognizant of that end of things. But now those kind of songs, Cardi B, Black culture, is getting bigger. So if somebody was like, I want to do like complete like Black culture, Black women's hair, and do braids, or you know any aspect of that, I'd be like, good, let's do that. So I'm like, my social scientist part of me is like, if you're feeling like Black culture and you want to put that into your thing, I'm documenting that. I'm not gonna push that away. I'm like, that's what's hot. That's what we're gonna do. Because basically, whatever, if I will suggest tweaks to concepts, but my whole thing about working with these models is they usually bring the concepts relatively finished to me, and they're like, I want to do this, or can we do something like that, XYZ. I'm like, sure. I'm more interested in Y right now. Let's do Z later when I have that item, or we can order it or whatever. It's just a practicality thing. But if somebody's like, I want to do cornrows, I'm like, okay. That to me is documenting what people are thinking about here in Korea. There's pretty much nothing I'd be like no to.
How does fetishization work with this, like of the Asian body? So I see that this is empowering, and this is 9-minute choosing these concepts, and they're going with this. Is there an argument that like feminists or other people might say that this is reinforcing stereotypes, and it's perpetuating the harm rather than solving the harm, or something like this?
I think that's just a crock of shit.
Okay.
Because I mean that's
why I'm asking you the question.
That seems like a very American thing to say, actually.
Okay.
Because if you talk about Sailor Moon or schoolgirl uniforms, me or these girls or these people doing these kind of concepts, basically responding to the existence of these tropes. To say that you're reinforcing they're doing something like, I've had that, come at me. You're like valorizing smoking. You're like encouraging people to smoke. I'm like, no, I'm not. People like big money and companies have made smoking cool. It is arguably a cool thing to do. I mean, it's a cool thing. That's why, gangsters and cowboys and stuff, they smoke when they deliver the cool line. All that stuff. It looks cool because it's been made to be cool. And having somebody respond to that or work with that in a look on Instagram as a nobody model with no power. I'm not a photographer with any power. And we're all trying to use these tropes to make another kind of critical commentary. So at least somebody's out there doing that. I mean, I want to be like, I'm not fucking Philip Morris out here like selling candy flavored cigarettes to kids. I mean, if you're really mad about that, go after those guys, and people have. But like even with this school uniform,
that's such a you shot, like that. Your background, whatever you call it, your screensaver thing there.
Oh, thank you. Like even this shot, which isn't mine, but 9-minute in this cute Sailor Moon outfit. I mean, the Japanese school uniform is the most sexualized, commoditized piece of clothing on the planet. On the fucking planet. Like, that's not like actual lingerie or something overtly sexual.
No, it's not. There's nothing sexual about it, isn't it? Except in our mind.
Yeah. But the thing is, the history of that uniform and why it's even a sexual object is much more complex and powerful, because this basically happened in like 1997.
I know. I've heard Sailor Moon, but Sailor Moon is just like an animation. It's like
Yeah.
One Piece or something like that. It's
Yeah.
just
Because it's the sailor outfit that
Yeah.
it's a Japanese school uniform. It used to not be so heavily charged. Even in the mid '90s, I know people who worked in JET who taught in Japanese middle schools, and they're like Japanese schoolgirls, like in the early '90s. They weren't even sexy. They were just gross. I remember one friend of mine who was teaching in Japanese
yeah.
girls' high school, and she's like, these pubertied up girls who are basically the biggest thing that makes me feel gross about them is like these girls sweat like crazy. I mean, back in the day when there was not air conditioning in these schools.
Oh man.
So she'd talk about in her class, these girls would hike up their skirts around their waists, spread their legs in class, and just fan their crotches because they're so hot. And she's like, that is the most disgusting fucking shit you could ever see in your life. And if you have a whole, and if you were in a room of Japanese schoolgirls for real,
Yeah.
you would not think anything sexy about that back in the day. But in the late '90s, and when Japanese schoolgirls became the main buyers for like these shops at Shibuya, and started making consumptive decisions for most of the high school kids in the country, they became the most powerful, like, actual capitalist figures in the country. I mean, they're making buying decisions that affect, millions of people. And that's when you start seeing the Wonjo Gyoje, the Enjo Kosai, the paid compensated dating.
Okay.
And that like illicit activity matched up with the way that the Japanese schoolgirls were fetishized in the media and were fetishizing themselves, and their aesthetic was spreading out to all the young girls in the country, and pretty soon media started picking up on it. And that's why, even if you don't know, but also another part of the perfect storm is online porn, internet porn, a lot of which is pumping out of Japan like crazy. The only representations of Asian porn, because Asians in American porn was always those representations were always garbage, but Japanese porn was pumping out like crazy. They had a highly developed porno industry. I brought this up at an academic conference with two young, cool presenters. They both had matching pink hair, matching pink wigs as they were presenting. I think they thought it was some kind of edgy, like
They were wigs.
transgressive thing. And I was like, so afterwards, I asked a question during the posting. I was talking about pornography and representations of women and Asian women specifically, and I raised my hand. I was like, what do you make of the fact that I don't think actually American pornography even has the power to control representations of Asian women, given the fact that so many of the Asian bodies having sex on the internet now in 1997 or 8 or whenever I said this is coming out of Japan. And the extreme misogyny, the extreme weird shit that happens to women's bodies, Asian women's bodies on the internet is coming out of Japan. So how can we even arrogate ourselves to think that we can push back against representation of Asian people on the internet? And they were just like, you're weird. Why are you talking about Japanese porn?
They said that with their pink wigs on.
Yeah, I was basically roundly ignored as some weirdo. But look what's happened. Asian porn, there's a reason we had, what's her name, in Kill Bill?
Lucy Liu.
No, the Japanese schoolgirl with the mace.
Oh, she was part of the Hateful Eight or something. Oh yeah, I can't remember what it was called, but yes.
And what I thought Tarantino totally got, if you're gonna do Japan, and it's obvious that he knows Japan, he's been there back and forth. He's got friends. I mean, he
loves the directors as well, doesn't he?
He knows
He's knows
that culture, the movie culture, the actual popular culture.
Yeah.
He puts a Japanese schoolgirl who's doing enjokosai with a businessman, and she likes to murder them while she's wearing her perfect little white socks and using her cuteness and not setting logic bombs, but she's pulling them into her web and fucking bashing their heads in. And that is something that we could understand, kind of, even if you don't know the culture. As viewers of that film, you're like, oh, that's like a Japanese thing. I know kind of that the schoolgirl. I kind of know what's going on. But, you know, the schoolgirl, Japanese schoolgirl, there's a reason that look has a certain aesthetic supremacy in the world.
Yeah. I've been in Japan and I've seen sort of sex shops with all the porn there, and you can just walk around with a little basket and things and just put, and it's like a Blockbuster, but just a Blockbuster of just porn of all sorts and stuff that I never thought would exist or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
But then in Korea, I don't know if we bring this to Korea and porn and sex, if you try to type, obviously this is what people have told me, you try to type porn into a Chrome browser or something, you're getting a police warning. It's like you're not allowed to look at that. So how does porn and sex work here with these models? And it doesn't play a role, or it's...
Well, I think the thing that I notice about that I find very interesting about the Japanese Sailor Moon, the schoolgirl, the Japanese schoolgirl, is how much in Japanese culture there's this melding of like actual Japanese schoolgirls who wear those uniforms for real, and you know how they've made themselves like sexy in relation to how that image has been super sexified across the world. Like there's this coming together, this blending, mixing of the actual Japanese schoolgirl as a self-empowered or self-described sexy person, or person who needs to see themselves as sexy. Like the real Japanese schoolgirl and the image of the Japanese schoolgirl have kind of melded. And I think that in the Korean case, Korean schoolgirls, I definitely took pictures of a portrait of Korean schoolgirls in 2002, 3, and Korean schoolgirls were just like, they just wore uniforms. It was like, there was nothing sexy about Korean schoolgirls because most of the outfits were ugly back in the day. But my point is, I think the Korean schoolgirl and the actual Korean schoolgirl and the sexified, which has happened in Korea, the sexified Korean schoolgirl have also kind of like started merging and exchanging with each other. Because now you can see in the street, Korean schoolgirls dress up to look like the sexy, fuckable schoolgirls that you see in all the movies, right?
The dramas as well. Yeah.
I mean, the paths are blending. The categories are blending.
Jacques Lacan said that you access the real through the fantasy. You have to go through the fantasy, and this might be one of those things that the fantasy is derived as a caricature of the real originally, like this sexified schoolgirl. Yeah. But now that sexified caricature becomes the thing that drives the reality now, and they kind of switch around in those things. When you talk about people with pink wigs getting like weirded out by you talking about porn and representation and things like this, now you're a proper academic. You've got your PhD, like you know the stuff. But it feels like when I look at it, and it was Dr. Mark Peterson, he said, David, do you know why academia is so like brutal? Because the stakes are so low.
He's exactly right.
Because what I want to make this point is you've gone on to Medium. By Medium, I mean like posting blogs. And in your work, and I might be mischaracterizing it to say if I'm wrong, but you swear and you use modern language and you use images, and it's, you know, you have the credentials and you have, but you're not just like, I'm going to publish SCI papers, but you're like, no, I want to talk like this, and I want to swear, and I want to say these words, and I want to talk about porn and sex and race, and it's quite an interesting approach to Korean studies, isn't it? Or it's quite an interesting approach to just life in general.
Well, to be an academic in Korea as well, because I was told there was this professor who was kind of like my mentor, kind of like my frenemy, who was
you have
like,
a lot of them in academia,
who was like trying to like push me up, especially with my K fashion thing. I mean, using me to do his own ends as well, which I was perfectly cognizant.
Korean or Western person?
Korean person who was trained in the West. So his advice for me was always a version of, yo, you got to really clean up your act. You got to like do things, act like a Korean academic, dress up better, lose weight, do all the things. And but I was like, yeah, that's not my thing. But in the end, I was right, because he did all those things. They still fucked him hard. All the things he did right, SSCI papers, he put them out like, just like making it rain, those papers. They still fucked him over. He wrote papers for other people. He did all the things right. He's Korean. They screwed him. Like, they're not going to respect me because I wrote even the top journal in sociology, American Sociological Quarterly, or whatever. Then I could write 10 of those articles, and they'd still be like, fuck that asshole because he's weird. So I just decided at some point in 2018, 19, that fuck it. I'm never going to succeed on their terms. The only way I can get ahead in academia in Korean studies in Korea, which is a weird place to be, frankly, because I never get hired to do the summer Korean studies programs because I'm based here, which means I'm garbage.
I get hired to do them all the time. You mean abroad international, or one's based here?
One's based here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. So I think I'm also, persona non grata with certain people.
I feel that too about myself, mate.
Yeah. And I just realized the only way for me to get ahead is I've got to do what every person who's made it in Korean popular culture has done. You can't do it through here. You've got to make it outside. The only way to get recognition in Korea is to get recognition outside Korea, which is how Sarejui, the whole thing works, right? You look at Baek Nam-jun.
Love him.
No, but the thing is, people still don't really fucking understand what he was doing. I mean, they kind of video art and whatever, but really break down what he was doing with text and all. Like, people really don't get it. They know he's the video TV guy.
They don't really understand
Yeah,
him.
even in the 80s, think anybody understood what the fuck he's doing? No.
TV Garden, TV Buddha, he was doing in the 70s, and Random Access in the 60s with music. I thought his stuff was really interesting.
I mean, if you
Sense of
are
humor.
on that, but he was like super not what artists are supposed to do in Korea, or even outside. But when he was super faded outside of Korea, he's like this god. Everybody Korean was like, I guess he's a god then. Nobody pushed back against that. The international global gaze, you make it there. Psy, they didn't like that motherfucker here. He had made a lot of problems here.
Smoking weed, all the protest politics.
And then he even had problems with his military service, which he solved by being like, you know what? Stop fucking talking shit about me. I'll go again. I'll just go twice. Are we done? But he wasn't the guy. When they wanted to push K-pop, they were pushing the Wonder Girls, which was crap. I mean, they were fine, but the idea that they were super popular was never true.
Tell Me was a big song. That was everywhere. It was a good song, but
I
other
loved
than
it.
that,
It was great.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like Canadian kids were like, tell me. But the Korean media tried to make you think so. The Korean media tried to make you think Rain was some huge shit.
These were all JYP people at the time as well, weren't they? Yeah.
They knew how to push the media buttons, the media play. And or Girls' Generation even. When they went on Dave Letterman in 2012, I think this is an important year. I watched that on YouTube, and I watched Bill Murray react, when they came over after singing, like 10,000 girls in a tiny, tiny stage, which was awkward to begin with. But he was kind of like, I'm confused. You can see it on his face, like, who are these people? And even Dave was like, thanks. I don't know what just happened here, but I was told that you were some kind of people. Thank you for performing. No one knew what the hell that was. Some weird Asian cheerleaders. It just doesn't fit into like the American means of understanding that kind of pop culture. But the very same year, 2012, is when Psy exploded. Not the guy anybody wanted to be the guy, to be the K-pop guy.
This was the chubby guy with a side part in that was doing a funny dance.
And without getting into a long explanation of Psy, I think there was a lot more than a lot of people dismiss him for. I mean, he's been a long, talented, he's a very good performer.
I like him.
I mean, Psy is awesome.
I like
But-
Champion. I think I know what he's doing in that song as
Yeah.
well. He's always playing with edgy stuff. He's doing it's a middle finger. It's a middle finger. It's like sausagey.
Psy's been two-fisting middle finger in Korean society, which is actually what Gangnam Style is.
Yeah.
The whole thing, to the point where he was rightly so accused of misogyny. With what's the drinking one with
Hangover.
Hangover,
With Snoop Dogg.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he has a very clear hatred of his own people, Gangnam people, Gangnam Style. It's a self-hatred. He hates so-called Gangnam bitches. Right? You can hear it in every lyric. You can hear it all the way he puts that, into the visuals of his songs. Yeah, it's a part of who he is. But
I've heard that from other people actually. That expression.
the Gangnam bitches.
Yeah. I've heard people say that to me. It's like, let's not go there. There's those
Yeah.
people. Like, it's a thing. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow.
And that's the vocabulary, visual vocabulary he's working with. He's connecting with that concept. So that edginess has been in Psy. He was certainly not the person they wanted to put up as the representative of K-pop. But you can't stop YouTube. When he broke the damn thing, people were like, well, I guess he's the guy.
It was genuine. People all saw it. They all watched it, and it wasn't fake or hyped up or like gukbang or the government promoting it. That
right.
Psy thing was.
And it wasn't, to be frank, this may piss people off, but it's not brown, Indonesian, Malaysian people, Filipino people. It's not other Asians who like him. It's white people, and not the off-brand white people, not Eastern European Stan people,
That's a hot take.
not Russian people.
Yeah.
It's white people in the West and North America.
Successful white people,
Right.
though, as well.
The good
yeah.
white people.
Yeah, or but people that were succeeding in their own lives, and that it wasn't people that use K-pop as a solace or a sanctuary
Yeah.
or as something to look up to. These were people already at the top that were liking Psy. I see that point.
See, K-pop made it with Psy because that's the point when you couldn't doubt anymore. You had to be like, oh, French people like Psy? Oh, not Chinese people. White people from New York. He was on Ellen. He was on Good Morning America. And people would ask me, is Good Morning America like a really big deal? And I'm like, yes, you can take that to the bank.
Yeah.
You were on GMA, you fucking made it.
This is that side Dewey, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you can be, I always say this, but like Rose from Blackpink, she can be number one in Indonesia for 4 weeks. It'll
No one
never make
gives
the
a
press.
crap.
She'll get number 60 in the British charts, not even top 40, and there'll be an article about it.
Right.
And it's like, no, you should give like equal credit to success that happens in non-white nations, but they don't.
They ain't going to do that.
Yeah. But it's huge here, isn't it? So are you doing with your medium, with your going off that way, you're doing the Psy, you're doing the Baek Namjoon.
Well, I think the problem is if I ever get recognition in Korea or get more offers or what have you, it's because I did shit in the States, yes. And the traditional thing I should do is publish university press, Duke University Press, academic press book. Duke, Harvard, yeah, it's too much for me. But Duke, yeah, that's a lot too. It takes too long. I'm too old and too impatient. And yeah, no thanks. I'll just rather produce good work, get a book out, get books out. But I just try to do the work and let it speak for itself. And if people recognize it later, cool, But I'm not going to get recognized by doing the traditional things that the Korean academics would respect. So I got to pull a Psy somehow. But
sometimes academia is boring. Like you read how much work and writing and 10,000 words on this article, and they say nothing sometimes, which is what your work always says something. You're always making a point, whether the point is, pushing this button or doing this, but you're saying something, you're starting a conversation. And I find like academia takes a lot of words to say nothing sometimes.
Yeah.
And
in fact, that's the equilibrium you come down to. No matter what thing you're trying to say about K-pop, well, in the end, you just have to say something very neutrally. You can't take too strong of a stance. And I'm just like, I want to show a picture. I'm not sure how we're doing on time.
yeah, we got some time.
of the key picture I published in a recent article.
Okay.
Files section. In fact, it's easier here.
Is this in Soulacious?
Could be. Hey Siri, open files.
You don't say please to your Siri.
No. So, give me the thing.
Just while you find it, I think it's fascinating that you communicate and you're driven by images, right? And that's what speaks to you.
So that is the
Embody. I'm glad that says bouquet and not bukake. Embody your bouquet.
Yeah, so I wrote a paper about bouquet, like the sub character.
You might have to explain bouquet for people that don't. I know it, but what's bouquet, Mike?
Bouquet. So like there's character, which is like your sub character, like your alter ego, and then there's a bonke, like your original official forward-facing character.
I think that's the first time I've heard bonke.
Bonke. So the trick amongst the kids these days is that you work in a bank. You go to the bank.
Yeah.
You sit in your seat. You went to a certain college. You have a certain image. You're married. You have 2 kids. Whatever. Your official image. That's your bonke. Like your name is Kim Ji-eun, and you're like a nice person, and you have like the nice uniform on. But your bouquet would be like your Instagram thing where you're a pay model. You put on so much makeup that you're like a drag queen. No one recognizes you, and you do like bikini shots. Then you make side money that way. That would be like your bouquet, like your digital alter ego.
Koreans have loads of bouquets. That's a huge thing here. I don't know if it's a bigger thing back home, but they like have 3 or 4 Instagram accounts.
Yeah. So one thing that, so I did this study with Instagram actually here. We did this kind of like ethnographic, one of these business, user studies. And Instagram was very surprised at how Koreans use Instagram, because some of the respondents we had to like ask them questions about their Instagram. We interacted with their Instagram main account, and one of the typical interviews was like, yeah, I've got 7 Instagram accounts, one for this, one for this, one for this. And people were like, what? Like, I mean, some were monetized, and the way they monetized them with like the pay modeling thing, they'd never heard of this. So, because they were like, so do people use the shop feature, like certain features in Instagram to sell things? And some of the answers that came back were like, yeah, I don't even know about that thing. We just do things in different ways. But like the bouquet thing came up as a word in the studies. So Koreans have very successfully digitally compartmentalized themselves, and they've professionalized it.
Do you do, for example, Soulacious, Medium, and Insta? Do you do TikTok, or do you have a look at TikTok much? Because TikTok is a lot of kids are on TikTok these days, mate.
I mean,
I don't know why I'm whispering about it.
but they're kind of not in Korea. I mean, Koreans use TikTok. They're watching TikTok, but they're also, since so much of that is on Reels, I feel like more people are using Reels and YouTube Shorts, and maybe using parts of TikTok, like one of the parts of TikTok to professionalize thing, which I recommended to Instagram. Make this. I wasn't from a user. It was just you need to offer more professional tools to make your shit, which is what TikTok does. CapCut is like Final Cut Pro level editing, and so I think to make the TikToks, they may use a lot of these tools, and then you got to do Reels, you got to do Shorts these days. But which is one reason I think that the Americans right now freaking out over we have to ban TikTok. Like, you're just barking up the wrong forest.
It's because Zuckerberg lost, because nobody liked his metaverse. And Facebook's dead. So they're like, you're corrupting our kids. We can have our bad tech giants, but not your bad tech giants. It does seem a bit like that to me.
And also, it just seems like they're barking at just clouds. Because you're pissed off that this media form exists and it can be used for dastardly deeds. But you can't stop the media form. I mean, you're gonna ban Reels too?
No, you can't. It's just the way people do it these days. There's they don't want to read as much. They just they want this short form. They want this vertical thing. That's just what they're used to. I mean, I've got young kids. I see how native they are to this stuff.
Yeah.
They just pick up the pad and they're like, boom, 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 watch it like this. And my kids, they're watching one video and they're scrolling through the ones that they want to watch next, preparing it. Do you see what I mean? These are 6 years old, Mike.
And
like,
the medium is the message, as Mr. McLuhan said a long time ago. If you want to talk about how TikTok or TikTok-like things have harmed our children, China, who cares about their political goals or propagandistic whatever? I mean, you've warped our. That's why China banned all of our shit.
Facebook, YouTube, BBC, you get none of that in China.
And
without the
you think about American freedom, but frankly speaking, we're using Chinese logic, which has been correct the entire time. For all of our talk of freedom of speech and blah blah blah, America's like, yeah, we're gonna ban this shit out. Nobody's talking about how maybe we shouldn't. Doesn't that violate our own values? But people used to poo-poo, we can't do Instagram, Google, YouTube, and China. And Chinese government, I think, was rightly like, yeah, why would you let foreign media platforms into your society? Because it does lots of bad shit. We don't even know all the bad shit it's going to do, but they could do bad shit. And basically the bad shit it does is everybody in America, the kids, they want to be an influencer. They want to be Insta famous. They want to be a model. But, Chinese kids, apparently, I heard this in some story, still want to be like doctors and engineers and like astronauts, standard things, But American kids are like, I want to do silly dances, which is fine if you also want to be something else.
I don't see that in the Korean universities. I don't see people wanting to be influencers. And I've only got I'm at 2 unis, so I don't see every university kid here, and they're all very different. They're not monolith, but I don't see. I see, and I teach now a course in digital media communication, but I see the young South Korean men and women, they want to remain more anonymous online. They want to be able to go online and see the stuff, but they don't want to be the person in front of the camera because it's dangerous here. You kind of don't want to be known sometimes in Korea. For the Korean people, you want to blend in and enjoy all your stuff.
See, I think one of the things I talk about in another paper I did was the fact that given all the extreme social disciplining of women and the misogyny in the history of Korean media, I mean, we're talking about to the 1920s in newspapers talking about women are over-consuming, and you go back to forgotten people, like the pink pajamas girl on Pandora TV, which everybody fucking forgot about.
I don't know this.
So there's this little cute middle school girl who had pink pajamas on in the video, and she danced sexy dance, which was popular.
This is in Korea?
Yeah. So this is Pandora TV pre-YouTube platform.
Okay.
So she did the sexy dance, and she was castigated. They came after her. But she was in middle school, so they kind of backed off. And there was the parents are evil, blah, blah, blah. What kind of person are you raising? But then people forget the 2005 dog poop girl. That was the first case of cyberbullying, really. And it was because, people forget the gendered aspect. She had a cute little white expensive dog, and she was a young woman who was kind of, engaging in foreign fashion trends. She was well dressed. She had shitty shoes on, but whatever. But she
literally,
she was doing all the things young women are not supposed to do in Korea, and they came after her like no mercy, scorched earth. I got her citizen's number, her school number, her home address, that whole nine, and. That World, people getting fired from their jobs for having bikini photos at Hallyu Beach in the mid 2000s. That kind of stuff is pretty common. But so given that background, the Instagram pay modeling and the kind of subcultures of these quasi-feminist, semi-feminist performance artists doesn't really make cultural sense if you think about it. It's too dangerous to really engage in. But there are people. It's very easy to find these kinds of performing artists who want to do crazy concepts. So the Red Boots, I got the red boots that were going around the internet.
They're kind of like the Kanye boots or something, aren't they? As well, I don't want to, but they were the thing, weren't they?
Yeah.
Big oversized moon boots.
Well,
type stuff.
I think Mischief was actually playing a huge trolling joke because I think what Mischief is doing is what Shepard Fairey did back in like the early '90s with his Obey campaign. So he had the sticker of Andre the Giant.
I know Andre the Giant.
Yeah, so Andre the Giant has a posse. And they put his big, like, stenciled face on these stickers and these posters. They succeeded in putting up on billboards along I-95 in Providence. And people were like, what is this? Is this a satanic cult? Why is Andre the Giant have a posse? Who are these people?
What's a posse? Is a group of people.
A posse like a gang.
A gang. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so if you look up Andre the Giant has a posse, these stickers online. I mean, the thing is, if you kind of know, I mean, you know it's not serious if you're a young person.
Yeah.
Back then.
Yeah.
But Andre the Giant has a posse was hilarious. The biggest practical joke.
Yeah. Because Andre the Giant doesn't need a posse. He's his own posse, isn't he?
He can barely walk at the time.
Yeah, man. He would just. I was always so impressed by the tales of his drinking and things like this, and just how he would have to get on planes to go to Japan, and where the fuck does he sit? And
3 seats.
Yeah, man. Andre the Giant has a posse.
So people got into this joke, and they started printing their own copies and sticking them all over the place, up and down the East Coast, all over the U.S. And so that made Shepard Fairey like a god of design and everything. That's where the Obey thing comes from. So the whole thing that he talked about was this whole thing was an experiment in phenomenology, like So the idea of making this kind of large media phenomenon that actually has nothing to it. So I think that's actually what Mischief is doing. They're just like, let's just make these fucking ridiculous boots and see what happens. Who picks how far it'll go? And it kind of went a long way. People buying this shit for $1,500, and the big influencers like, I gotta get a pair.
Were they hard to get in Korea, or you just find them everywhere?
They were hard to get before they were officially released. But then after they were officially released, of course, Alibaba and a million Chinese makers,
Xi'an and stuff like that.
where they made. I bought these for $50 from Alibaba.
They look like something out of I don't know, like what you would buy from old toys, like Lego or Bill and Ben or something.
People joke they're the Astro Boy.
Yeah, okay, that would make sense. Can you say something about? I know fashion, photography and things.
Can we pause or? I realize I could have answered your question better.
Which one?
About the as a scholar in Korea, cursing and things.
Yeah.
So I think the better way to maybe put that at the front of the question would be like, or the answer would be like, I can't really be the perfect Confucian scholar that they expect a lot of people to be. In fact, so like many Korean scholars can't be that person either.
No.
And you don't want to be anymore because that age is over. And students want a different relationship, I think, with professors. They bring me in as a foreign professor in many of my positions to be an American professor for Korean students, to offer a little bit of a different experience, to bring out an American-style brashness.
Yeah.
Or, intellectual engagement because, frankly speaking, Korean kids don't talk. They're not encouraged to talk. A little bit of that American, like when you have American students in your classes, probably, they just won't fucking shut up. Like Americans are, I think, me. And that being overly done is a problem. But I think a little dose of that with Korean kids can be helpful.
Can I say that generally, and I have so many international students and domestic students and from Asia and America and Northern Europe and stuff and Koreans, but normally the students that do the best work are the Korean students. They I'm not all of them.
Singapore.
I'm talking about Singapore. No lie, man. Some of the students I got from Singapore. Wow, these people are smart. But it wasn't just like you get one or two. I had this class of 50 Singapore students, and I was just like, "You're Jesus, ridiculously smart." They were getting ideas that I would throw at them, and I would normally take an hour or so to go through this idea with people and unpack it.
I've seen them
Singapore students would go boom.
I've seen them do things, and I'm just like written midterms and finals.
Yeah.
Like quotation marks, passages of the book. I'm like, what drug are you taking? Give me some, because this performance enhancing drug you all seem to have is like the handwriting itself looks like a font when you get it back on the, and it's always some Singaporean student who's like, you know, according to the article on page 15, said block quote. Who block quotes in a written
In the
exam?
handwriting, the Singaporeans.
Yeah, that's some serious business right there.
They've got it going on. But because we don't have much time, can we do a little bit of quick fire? Because there's lots on
Yeah.
this paper that I haven't done yet.
Oh, yeah.
So let's do a little bit of quick fire of some of these. The first one from Jacko Zwetsloot. He sent me
yeah.
this. You know Jacko. He was very happy.
Gotta be ready for a Jacko question.
You know, it's Jacko told me, David, you should have mic on. He was very pointed about that, and I'd have been thinking about it, but he was really happy that you were coming on. Anyway, Jacko asks, Jacko says, I seem to recall Mike poo-pooing the concept of Korean wave over a decade ago, so ask him now his views on global Hallyu. Have they changed or developed over time?
Yeah,
It's a Jacko question.
he's absolutely correct, because I wrote the article. Well, I think the name of the article for Korea Times was "There is no Korean wave," and I was
internet
trying to
never
make
forgets.
trouble.
Yeah.
And I think what I was saying in that article was most of the Korean wave that is being talked about is just hyped up stuff, like we talked about with Rain and Wonder Girls. And I'm like, that's not really a thing. And I think, like other people, it was after Psy hit and he stayed hidden, that everybody was like, it must be a thing now. And I think everybody was like, okay, now that debate's over. What do we do? How do we make sense of what's happening? And I think after Psy, like many other people, it's just like, well, that debate's done. Yeah. And then after movies and TV, there's no debate. There's no possible way for anyone to maintain the position that Korean stuff isn't cool, like, anymore. Yeah.
I love the fact that you openly admit you write articles that cause trouble sometimes, or just to be tried, or just because to explore ideas. Because I write an article every week, and like sometimes people read it and they'll go like, "Oh, you got this wrong." I'm like, mate, sometimes you just need to explore ideas and have fun, and not every article is like some peer-reviewed. You spent your whole life working on this article. It's just a thought over coffee that you're just trying to like get some people to talk about stuff. And I think you do that quite a lot, don't you? You seem to play with it.
I have, and I also kind of assume purposely difficult positions sometimes. And then sometimes I put up pictures that are just like, sorry, I swallowed things wrong. If me and 9 Minute want to do some, I mean, she's the kind of person who would do some crazy, edgy, like something that looks like it's just reproducing dominant tropes, but in there is a little bit of a tweak that ends up being a logic bomb that traps a lot of basic thinkers. That's just very sort of stuff that I love to do.
Yeah. I like this idea of logic bubble. Does 9 Minute speak English?
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Much better than people her age would. And the thing about 9 Minute that makes all these models very interesting is her job, she does all these edgy things, right? But she's a baker. She bakes shit. My biggest, most appreciated present from her was she's been practicing doing baguettes. And she delivered a bag of her practice baguettes. And I was like, they were amazing.
That was good French pronunciation, by the way. You got that one right, baguettes. The French word for chopsticks, baguettes. That's what French people call chopsticks, baguettes. A baguette is not a piece of bread; it's just a long thing. So that's also that. There's this band called the Rum Kicks, and they're huge, and they're a 3-piece punk band, but they put up the huge mohawks and they dress it up. Do you know what I mean? It's not so much about the music as much about the aesthetic that you get to go and see 3 Korean women doing that. And one of them works in a Hanyang. Like you see her in a bonke, right? And she's just like a nurse working in a oriental, like an alternative medicine thing, a Hanyang, right? And then on Saturday night, she's just fully punked up. It's really interesting that.
That's totally the Korean way.
It's on brand, yeah. And
And
that's what the idols are doing, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, like some of these models who do the girl with the ripping the condom thing.
Hannah.
Yeah, Hannah. So she was like, her longest job, she's also a cook, but she was the person who made your food at the Outback. She cooked at the Outback. So your Tumba Woomba pasta was made by her.
Outback used to be a thing.
Yeah.
I don't see Outback anymore, but Outback, you used to go to Outback, you used to have the bread and the butter and the soup. And all of a sudden, just, let's do a couple more quick fires before we get out. Is there something the world gets desperately wrong about Korea? Is there something that people like misunderstand about Korea? It's like, no, you got it twisted.
Well, I think people buy the K-pop shiny version of Korea, and they forget that and I think even Korean people, this sounds arrogant to say, the young Korean people get Korea wrong, because there's like 2 Koreas. There's like old school, underneath everything, old school, original Korea, where rules are flexible, where everything depends on who you are. It's all relational. And then there's like what the young people know, which is like, objective, fair rules that apply to everyone in society. A democratic Korea. Like, that's new. So when people sometimes come and they discover that what's really running the show is the non-democratic old school way, people get really bent out of shape. So I don't know. I think buying the nice shiny Korea is like, you're not getting what really is running the show still.
Hierarchical relationships and power distance, especially if you speak Korean and you're working with Korean people. That's like, I find it hard to explain that to people sometimes. If they're just coming here and they're only interacting in English, it's like, no, when I speak to these people in Korean, I'm like honorific language and bowing. And that's how it goes, even if I'm in my 40s. Let's do a couple more of these quick fire. I like this all of a sudden. Can you speak on the concept of the LGBT community? Because you've done some work with trans DJs and things like this. So we haven't covered any of that.
I feel like that's really a function. All the LGBT stuff, the queer Korea stuff that's coming out these days is, I think it's a function of the fact there's the under 30s Korea, and then there's the over 30s Korea, that generational divide. And I get on my hypermodern thing. I think younger kids, under 30-ish people, especially the younger you go, have a very hypermodern version of what their identities are. It's malleable, it's consumer-based, it's what I want. It's about me. I don't have to choose between preset modern notions of the Korean, male, female, old school nationalism, patriotism. That's old-fashioned. So I think LGBT flowering politically and I think personally, identificationally, is a function of the fact that the younger people just completely think differently about how it is to be Korean, how it is to be a person in this society, which is why I think most young people are like, meh, it's not a big deal. I really don't care, dude. Like, you can be whoever you want to be, and I can, because I have this consumer-based notion of what it means to be a person here. I think that's the biggest thing that is making the LGBTQ successes possible. Is basically you've got a field of people who are just like, you do you. You literally have the essential right to do you, just as I do. Just as if I want to be a feminist, so what? Like, there's no law against it, literally no law. But I think people who are above that age, who are very much raised on the notion of modern identities, feel like, because the people who are on the other side of the queer culture festival doing the anti-protests, what they're actually protesting is the disillusion of their modern rigid concepts, right? They're like, wow, how dare you not be from Christian folks' point of view? How dare you not go to church and do certain things and be a good girl and get married and have kids and all the things that are going on with the population. They're basically a bunch of old fogies, gonde, as it were, who don't understand how to speak to people who they have zero interest in being a good housewife and chake and having 2 kids and doing their national duty. So, I think it's a big generational divide that allows that to be a thing. And also, the bonke thing, it definitely fits onto social media in the way that Koreans use it very well.
Yeah.
You want to be a drag queen, king, whatever you want to do. You want to be a makeup artist, be a do drag makeup tutorials. It's very easy to do when you're working with your bouquet. Yeah. And doing that online and getting recognition for it. So.
And having bonke bouquet, that's that fluidity. It's removing those static, solid identities. Yeah. I find it interesting you said about the people under 30 and over 30, and I think there's a lot of reality in that. But yet the media talks about 2030, talks about 20s and 30s. It talks about MZ. It's like this whole 2 decades of people. Yeah. And it's like, that's a bit too broad, actually. Yeah. You got to divide that up a little bit, I think, more.
I feel like, in my experience, it's about 30. That's what I think. That's how I think it brings down. So when you look at the people on opposing sides of that queer cultural festival out at Sichung, you look out and you're like, just a bunch of old people, over defined by 30, and a few weirdo, hardcore, right-wing young people who are brainwashed, I think, by their elders. Yeah. And you look inside the circle, ain't nobody over the age of 30 over there. Like, everybody's, and you get down to high school kids who are starting to discover their identities and things like that, and learning to assert themselves, define themselves. You got a lot of younger kids, and then it really balloons out in the 20s, tapers off into getting up there, but about 30, unless you're a hardcore old school activist or one of the elders in the community, you don't have many people who are above that age. Yeah.
And young people today, they would have grown up with Sam Smith and whatever else it might be, just seeing these naturally, and they'd be able to see it in their room by themselves. They didn't have to watch the television in the living room, and they didn't have to watch Friends or something where everything was a bit more sanitized and conservative. But young people today, I think they just grow up with different resources. They have their own phones and televisions. They have all this content, and that's changing so much. One question on race. We didn't touch this. In your personal experience, I don't know how I'm allowed to ask this, but I get 역차별, or I get positive discrimination. I feel sometimes just being white, and sometimes they just want a white person in there. Sometimes they want an American in there. You've been here since 1994. Do you have any observation on what it's like for you to be you in this society and how that works?
Well, back to the 30s thing. Above 30 thing. So a lot of people talk about, I don't give this argument very much serious thought. Generally, people are, the old people just have to die off and things will get better. I generally think that's a silly argument. But in Korea, I definitely think that there's something more to that. Because most of the people who define Korea as an extremely racist society, and it is still, but mostly with people who are above that age range, who were born at a certain time, they've not been able to erase that notion of proper people, especially foreign people being white people. And younger people just literally don't care. I mean, of course, there are problems and there's going to be racist, there's exceptions, but generally, I've never had a problem in my classes with students or whatnot, except a couple times at a certain art university I won't name. But yeah, generally, I find so a good example is at the once most prominent foreign language high school that I won't name, but I think everybody will know what it is. This was the standard Hagwon line, which was, oh, I heard that there was a problem hiring me because I was black, and the students might find you intimidating. And I was just like, I'd been around long enough to be like, yeah, the student excuse. Like, I've never met a Korean student who had a problem directly with me, who wasn't taught to have a problem with me because of my race. And I came to find out after I was hired that indeed it was the older guys who were like, oh, he might be like scare them or something. I'm like, you're just projecting your fears onto the students. I had zero problems. Students were awesome. We got close. Yeah, the race thing, if anything, with Korean students these days, if you bring in your otherness from whiteness, they're like, oh, especially blackness, they're like, oh, we are into that. We like that more. Yeah. So young people are like, oh, that's extra bonus. But
spec up.
Yeah. Older people are like, yeah, that's weird. But I do think, to finish off that thought, my spec, I mean, to be frank, spec that's gotten me to be able to stay long in Korea, well, besides spec, my visa, my mom is Korean, I have Korean blood, I have an F4 visa, so I can just take a job without sponsorship anywhere I want. That's in the background. And then spec-wise, with my race appearance working against me, generally, going to Phillips Andover Academy, which wasn't a thing in the 90s, but that's become a big thing now in Korea. Brown University, Ivy, and then 2 Fulbrights, which doesn't really matter to a lot of people, and then the UC Berkeley doctorate, which is top 3 in grad schools.
Sai's also from Berkeley. Didn't Sai go there? Is he some there?
LEE, music school in Boston.
So yeah,
but he didn't graduate, from what I understand.
You did.
Yes, I did. Finally. Finally.
Yeah.
But yeah, that has been like magical amulets of power. Like if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be able to be here at all. So I was always able to get my foot in many doors very easily with those specs. And yeah, it's generally when something specific, a guy doesn't like me, a dean doesn't feel me. And I've heard this before. I've been presented spec-wise to this high-up person, and the response that this person communicated, another person communicated, was I was introduced. He was like, oh, he wasn't the image that I expected. Because I think, one, I wasn't the race he expected. I wasn't the feel that they expected. I wasn't as form, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think if I had been like you, like a white guy, put on a suit, like it fit his expectation.
Yeah.
They'd have been like, oh, we like that. We like what you're doing, even though you're just existing. Yeah. So
do you ever, I don't mean to be insensitive about this, so please tell me if I'm wrong. Do you ever, your mother is Korean.
Yeah.
Do you ever use that? Do you ever say that, hey, listen, man, like I'm here?
Actually, the funny thing is I have to put that forward differently these days. So when I first came to Korea back in 94, and I would be like, my Korean was crap. It was non-existent. Didn't know anything about the place because obviously I never lived here. So I was clueless as any other American person would be in 1994 with nearly zero Korean. And then Korean people who I befriend or what have you, teachers in my school, would be like, "Oh, wait, we heard your mother's Korean. What the like what? why you cheated?" Like that's why later as my Korean got better, it became a liability. They're like, "You deceived us. You tried to act like you didn't know anything, but you spoke Korean. You learned Korean from your mom." I'm like, "Actually, that's not what happened. But sorry if I offended you. But like I've had to present it differently." So I used to be that, like it was something that I just could casually just not think about. But if they find out later, it's like, "Oh, you try to take credit for learning." I'm like, actually, if we're talking about credit for learning Korean, I didn't have any advantages. I mean, I might have had a little, but my Korean did not exist back in the day. And you could ask people I knew back in '94 if you could track them down, if they ever had to do hard-hitting documentary expose on me. Did he speak Korean in 1994? But yeah, it's now something that I've hidden from people. But in terms of Americans, that's the funny thing is generally Koreans don't care. But in terms of American identity politics, not to start sounding like a Tucker Carlson or anything, but I mean, American lefties are so focused on identity politics. It's just ridiculous. So one reason I don't think I could do well in Korean studies in the States is I had a friend, a mentor, kind of a sunbae, who is high up in Asian American studies, and she was encouraging me to apply for a position. She was like, "Hey, I noticed on your cover," I had people who read my cover letters, some of which were really bad, but she's like, "I noticed in your cover letter you don't actually seem to have a Korean name. Do you have a Korean name?" I'm like, "No." And she was like, "I think you might think about making one." I'm like, "Nah, that's not really my thing. It's just a fake. It's not my real given name. If it had been really given, it's just some shit I made up, right?" So, and I was like, "Yeah," and she was like, "But do you want to work in Asian American studies in the United States?" Like, so, and actually, I have a African American friend who's very into the reading of all the major books in ethnic studies, different Asian American, African American. So he's more up on it. I used to like get the information from him, and he's like, "Hey, I think you should really think about making your name Michael Hertzsong, like my mom's maiden name." I was like, "Yeah, that sounds kind of desperate and fake." But I'll say right here, maybe I shouldn't. There's a lot of Korean Americans who definitely push that forward to get like white editors because they become the ethnic informant, right? You're Korean American, you have you're Sunja Smith, right? Suddenly, everything you say about Korea is like you're the Korean informant, even if you don't know shit about the place. Yeah. And I've had low key Korean American friends who are academics be like, "Yo, I got stuck teaching a K-pop class. I don't want to fucking do this shit, but I have to do it. I can't. It's so hot these days. They can't really turn it down. My students want me to teach popular culture. Help me out. What should I be looking at? Update me. Give me the fresh info." And they're very uncomfortable because they're stuck with that expectation because to white faculty, "Oh, you're the Korean." And you don't want to be like, "Well, actually, I'm kind of whitewashed and I don't really know anything more about Korea than you do." Or my other white colleague who's really into K-pop, don't stick this on me. But yeah, you don't want to turn that away. But then again, some people jump on that.
Yeah. Both your answers to both those, I would never would have. It's lovely to hear you say what you said. The way your experiences here, you look upon them positively, and that you don't seem willing to sort of sell out or something or use things to get ahead. You want to do it your way. You want to do it the way you're doing it. I think it's fascinating. they're going to kick us out of this room in a minute. I think we'll come back and do part 2 in a month or something, right? Because I feel like we're just getting started, right? we just got there. Thank you.
Thanks for the good interview questions. Got me talking.